Hey Minot, 2020 is the year for more. Yes, it's the U.S. Census season, and with it, Minot could see more. More opportunities for business, more federal funding for roads, for our schools, and for our community. Take part in something more. Take the census, because for us, more means more. Visit Minot and
Call the meeting of the Minot City Council to order for today, Monday, March 16th. It is 5:30. I would once again remind everyone in the audience to put your cell phones on vibrate or on silent so that we can keep the distractions down to a minimum. Roll call, please.
Janser.
Here.
Olson. Here. Pittner.
Here.
Padragula.
here.
Straight.
Here.
Wolski.
Here.
Sitma.
Here. Number 2 is Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We are going to do a couple of things out of order tonight. One that is not on our agenda. Former Mayor Carol Erickson recently passed away, and I think in honor of our former mayor, if we could just take a moment of silence in honor of his recognition, dedication not only to the city but to the county and the different roles that he played in our community as well as former police chief. Thank you. Also out of order, what I would be looking for is a motion from an alderman's to address 9.2 on our agenda in front of number 3 from the council, and this is regarding not only the First District Health Unit's report to be filed, but also other actions by the city regarding COVID-19.
So moved. Second.
Motion by Alderman Padragula, second by Alderman Straight. Any discussion on the motion? Any discussion on the motion? Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Padragula.
Yes.
Straight.
Yes.
Wolski.
Yes.
Sitma.
Yes.
Janser.
Yes.
Olson. Yes. Pittner.
Yes.
Motion approved. That does put us then on 9.2. This is the report from the First District Health Unit and other information and activities regarding COVID-19. We do appreciate the annual report that has been filed by First District Health Unit. Of course, typically we would have that agency come and deliver their report to the council. Understandably, many folks with the First District right now have lots of other meetings, phone conferences, and other activities that we ourselves are relying on information from them. So we appreciate all of their hard work, dedication, and continued service as we work through the pandemic that continues to evolve. That being said, unless there is any questions or comments on the annual report, We would look then to the COVID-19 emergency declaration from the city of Minot that was presented here, or actually pushed out to the community just about half hour, 45 minutes ago. That is a declaration that is signed by the city manager and his right for a period of 7 days. And city manager, some folks do have some questions out in the community as well as what this declaration does mean and what other action we'd be looking from the council regarding that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This afternoon, I signed an emergency declaration for the city of Minot, declaring a state of emergency for our community in and around the COVID-19 virus. Given all the information that's out there and given what other agencies are doing, we felt it was prudent to follow suit and ensure that we could, with this declaration, become eligible for federal and state reimbursement for impacts associated from COVID-19 to our community, whether they be lost time, maybe equipment, materials, supplies, other sorts of things. My action is limited as the city manager to 7 days, so the city council will have to extend for a certain period of time if they so chose to continue this declaration in order to, during that period of time after the 7-day expiration of my period, remain in the position of being able to again seek reimbursement and other assistance from the state and federal government. So what you have before you here is the declaration that I signed this afternoon, and if you should so choose as a city council to extend this, the recommendation is on the reverse, which is essentially to ask you to extend this by a motion and a vote of the city council so that this declaration will remain in effect until it is either rescinded by you, the city council, or by the governor of North Dakota. So that's what you have before you at this point in time. Happy to answer questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. City Manager. Alderman Janser.
Mr. Mayor, I would move that we affirm the emergency declaration and that it remain effective until it's rescinded either by this council or by executive order of the governor.
Second.
Motion by Alderman Janser. Was that a second by Pittner? Motion and a second. Discussion or questions for our city manager? Alderman Walski.
Brief comment. Thank you, Mr. Berry, for taking the initiative and having us prepared. This was on my agenda of items to ask about tonight, and I'm glad we're in front of this. Thank you.
Comments or questions? If not, we have a motion and a second. Please call the roll.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson,
Yes.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padragula,
Yes.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski,
Yes.
Sitma.
Yes. Motion is approved. One other item that is before us regarding the COVID-19, and this is a discussion that we started last week with staff regarding the employee absence due to COVID-19 pandemic. There is information in front of us. It is quite substantial. Essentially, what we would be doing is adopting a bit of a change in regards to our employee compensation for illness or sickness, and this would be changing that to if an employee or a family member would be deemed to be in self-isolation or self-quarantine by the North Dakota Department of Health, that we would then change that portion of the employee policy to have leave with pay, which is different from what our manual currently says. And I would look to our HR director if I'm misstating any of that in the condensed version. But talking with not only the employees, but with also officials from around the state of North Dakota, many others are taking some changes in regards to their employees because of this very unique situation, and it was deemed prudent, as well as if some employees are adversely affected, that it also doesn't become catastrophic to them and their families in what we hope is not a prolonged pandemic crisis across not only the world, the U.S., but here in North Dakota. I would be looking for a motion if anyone has questions prior to that. We could certainly bring up our Human Resource Director to answer questions, or our City Manager. questions? And if not, we'd be looking for a motion for an adoption of change. Alderman Wolski.
Mayor Simma, thank you. I'd move that we pass the resolution before us to address employee absences due to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Second.
Motion by Alderman Wolski, a second by Alderman Straight. Questions or discussion? Alderman Wolski.
Brief comment. Once again, appreciate the work that's gone into getting us to this point with this resolution. This is obviously an extraordinarily unique situation, and I appreciate our response to it. This is especially one of those situations where we need to be adamant about people not coming to work sick, and providing security in those circumstances is, I think, a very aggressive and appropriate first move.
Further discussion or questions? Alderman Olson.
This could be for the city manager or the HR director. Is there any proactive movement right now to have employees stay home, or will this go into place if they are diagnosed with COVID-19?
Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Alderman Olson, there is. We've actually just developed a task force, informal position today, and we are addressing a number of these types of operational issues. And last week, the Human Resources Director did send out an email that essentially instructed all staff, if they're feeling sick, to not come to work. So we have already taken that position. We're taking a number of other positions and having to work through various operational aspects of how we keep critical staff safe, and also on the job, what we do with their families if their families get sick. There's a number and a whole host of different things that we're working through right now. And we will continue to meet and work through those issues. We have more questions, unfortunately, at the moment than we do answers. And of course, this is very dynamic, and we're getting information from a number of different sources. But I can assure you that we're working the issue as hard and as diligently as we can.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Alderman Straight.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess just to reiterate, and I'm sure I haven't looked at the city website, but in the event that we do have staff that are ill, to follow the recommended process to call the phone number. I don't think we can reiterate that enough. That don't just go to the emergency room. My father and I, my father's 74 years old, we had this conversation last night of just the drastic changes that have taken place since I was a kid. We need to protect our, as Governor Burgum said last night, we're probably 1,000 healthcare professionals short in the state, and we need to protect those individuals. And so it's just a reminder, I think, to not only if you're sick to stay home, but also to follow the recommendations to call that phone number and to not go to the emergency room, sir. So.
Mm-hmm. Alderman Wolski.
Mr. Mayor, I appreciate maybe just a slight divergence from this specific resolution in motion, maybe just to the larger COVID circumstances. But in my opinion, I greatly appreciate the manner in which the state of North Dakota and Governor Burgum are handling this. I think it's great that we are the whole team approach and the cross, everybody working together is absolutely what we need in these circumstances. And in that spirit, Tom, Mayor, if there are resources that we have, and what has most immediately come to mind is Mr. Hackett and Mr. Obenchain with public information. It seems to me there is no amount of speaking from these organizations that is too much in terms of conveying essential critical information. And so if we have to set down our own priorities in the midst of this to help our partners focus, that notion would have my full support, and I just wanted you guys to hear that publicly. Thank you.
Appreciate that, Alderman Wolski. And that was actually one of the issues of topic as we were going through task force is further and continuing to push out information, not only with our partners, but developing our own talking points and information on how the public can interact. I do believe we are swaying just a tad, but I'm very much okay with expounding here a little bit away from topic, but also informing the public and how they can further interact with the city, whether it be online or through phone conversations, and encouraging those to make appointments if they do plan to meet with different departments or individuals within City Hall, seeing as a substantial change even this afternoon where the President himself made a strong encouragement with the CDC to limit public gatherings of no more than 10. And here we sit with a lot of people. So as we are moving forward, we will continue to make changes, and that may be even in the form of having a quorum of aldermen at the dais and 3 calling in as things evolve. There's certainly quite a bit of discussion out there. The idea is not to push panic, but information, and to make sure that people keep a calm and level head as we move forward. And I think that strong message with this motion towards our employees is that we are taking this very serious, and that we're trying to look at all aspects of the community, as the City of Minot is not primary in terms of reaction to the community. First District Health Unit has the lead within our community. Ward County Emergency Management is second, and the City of Minot being tertiary with backfill with those necessary resources or assets that are needed in this sense. But we do have a tremendous amount of business as well, and continuation of business is exceptionally important at this moment. So those are the conversations. Of course, input from all sources of leadership is greatly appreciated. And at any moment, if you do have anything, please reach out to the city manager or human resource director, public works director with ideas. We're going to continue to meet. One of those, again, not swaying too far, is the Census 2020, where we are going to be putting off those kiosks for the time being. We're going to try to supplement that with public information through social media and the website. But again, social distancing is the message from the CDC. And we're going to continue to push the information through the healthcare providers, through those professionals that are making those recommendations. So I greatly appreciate all the work from city staff that have put in this point in helping develop this, and as we continue on as things evolve. So I just truly hope that the public stays mindful and stays patient, stays calm moving forward. Further discussion or comments? Further discussion? If not, the motion and second before us is change to the employee absence due to COVID-19 pandemic. Please call the roll.
Wolski?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padrigula?
Yes.
Straight.
Yes.
Motion is approved. That takes us to number 3. We can certainly, under other discussion, if we do need to circle back to other topics, we can do that towards the end of the meeting. To get back onto our regular schedule here, number 3 is the Planning Commission report. 3.1 is a public hearing, Section 25, 156 North, 83 West, Outlot 15. A public hearing to consider a request from Carla and Devin Schmidt to rezone proposed Outlot 15 from AG to C2 or C2 only. The recommendation of the City Council is to subdivide a portion of the northwest quarter and a portion of the southwest quarter of the northwest quarter in Section 25, Township 156 North, Range 83 West, create a proposed Outlot 15 containing 50.00 acres, more or less. Number 2 is the recommendation of the City Council adopt a resolution to amend the future land use map of the Comprehensive Development Plan of the City of Minot to commercial for the proposed Outlot 15. And 3, recommend the City Council pass the ordinance to rezone proposed Outlot 15 from AG to C2 or C2 only. This is, again, a public hearing for anyone in the audience to come forward and speak either in favor or opposed to the recommendations that are before us. I'll just make the call one more time for a public hearing for anyone to come forward and speak for or opposed to the motion or to the issue before us. Alderman Wolski.
Move we close the public hearing and approve the items as recommended.
Second.
We have a motion to close the public hearing and move the items that are before us as recommended, and a second by Alderman Janser. Motion was made by Alderman Wolski. Discussion on the motion. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Wolski?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padrigula?
Yes.
Straight.
Yes.
Motion is approved. Number 3.2 in Section 3 is a public hearing. The Roses subdivision, Outlot 15 in Section 2155 North, 82 West. A public hearing to consider a request by Sanford and M. Gale Slindy to rezone Roses subdivision, Outlot 15 in Section 2155 North, 82 West from C2 General Commercial District to R1 Single Family Residential District. 2 recommendations before City Council is 1, adopt a resolution to amend the future land map designation of the Comprehensive Development Plan of the City of Minot from commercial to low density density residential for property described as Roses subdivision outlot 15 in section 20, township 155 north, range 82 west. And 2, recommendation to the city council pass an ordinance to change the zones from C2 general commercial district to R1 single family residential district. Again, this is a public hearing for anyone that is in favor or opposed to the recommendations that are before the council regarding outlot 15, section 20, 155 north, 82 west. Once again, a public hearing for anyone to come forward to speak in favor or opposed to the recommendations that are before us. Those recommendations are on the screen. If not, I would look for a motion.
Mayor, I move that we close the public hearing and approve the item
Second.
with the recommendations of staff.
Motion by Alderman Pittner for recommendations of staff and second by Alderman Straight. Any discussion on the motion? Discussion on the motion. Last call for discussion. Seeing none, please call the roll.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padragula,
Yes.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski,
Yes.
Sitma, Janser,
Yes.
Olson.
Yes.
Motion is approved. 3.3 on the agenda under the Planning Commission. Public hearing, the Shady Dell addition and a portion of the vacated 42nd Street Southeast cul-de-sac. This is a public hearing to consider a request by Matthew Kramer for a zone change from R1 Single Family Residential District to MH, which is Manufactured Home District, on Shady Dell addition and a portion of the vacated 42nd Street Southeast cul-de-sac. Recommendation before City Council is to deny the request to change the zone from R1 Single Family Residential District to MH Manufactured Home District to locate a manufactured home on the property located at 1015 42nd Street Southeast. We do have handouts along with this at the dais, and there were also additions, I believe, to this within the packets. This is a public hearing to come and speak either in favor or opposed. If you would, just come and state your name and address for the record, and the floor is yours.
My name is Matthew Kramer. I live at 6002 50th Street Southeast here in Minot, North Dakota. And I appreciate the time to be able to hear this. I know it wasn't on the agenda normally. But after the Planning Commission staff recommended to approve it and then a split vote on the Planning Commission, I thought it would be nice to be able to at least state about this. So the property in question was purchased 3 years ago with the intent to build a small family home on it. To prep the land, I had to remove 3 non-working cars, 2 dump trailers load of garbage and debris from the lot, and the house was literally rotting apart, so I demolished and removed that. The city employees thanked me. They had to deal with a lot of complaints on that property. But since then, I've cleaned it up. But due to the low land value of the area, I have been unable to interest buyers who want to put a modest family home there. Most have cited that it wouldn't be a good investment. However, I've been approached by many who already own mobile homes, like the Platts family here, that would like to have their own property. Currently, many are getting priced out of mobile homes. Now, as to the manufactured homes, mobile homes, I feel they get a bad reputation a lot of times just because of parks where the general population don't keep it up. Mobile homes in themselves can be quite nice. Another worry is that mobile homes can be just that, they're mobile. But as we all know, Huey House Movers has proved literally any house can be picked up, put on wheels, and trucked away. As to the zoning issue, if you look in the packets, the first page shows the zoning map of the area in question. That has the little black box is the property in question. Within 2 blocks of that property, there are over 30 manufactured home listings, so it wouldn't be out of place. The pictures in the packet in the next few pages show all the surrounding houses around that property. So in all reality, this updated mobile home, which is the last page, would really be probably one of the nicest houses in that area. So I personally fail to see how it could possibly hurt land values in that area to have a tax-paying homeowner who cares for the lot being there. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Kramer. Are there any questions from the council for Mr. Kramer? Alderman Padragula.
Quick question, would you be planning on any kind of landscaping or something to make it look more like a regular stick-built home? Because I know it has the skirting underneath, and that's pretty prominent.
Well, in that, actually, you can't actually see that property from the road. It's back behind a lot of mature trees. But the Platts family is actually here and would like to speak about it as well, and they could probably answer to that more than I could.
Alderman Straight.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Kramer, can you speak to the statement you made about there being priced out of the manufactured home market?
Not the market, the mobile home parks in the area continue to raise their rent. And Mr. Platts is here also, he would be speaking on that. But they're not being able to afford to rent their current spots because the price keeps going up.
Thank you, sir.
Further questions? Alderman Straight.
Mr. Mayor, I don't have a follow-up for Mr. Kramer, but I would like to ask city staff a question.
Okay. We'll just to see if there's any further questions for Mr. Kramer. If not, thank you, sir. Good evening, Mr. Billingsley.
Good evening.
Alderman Straight.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Billingsley, the reason I asked Mr. Kramer about the lot rent, and I spoke with the owner of the home that would like to move into this area. I recognize that a spot ordinance change isn't always desirable, but I'm curious about, as we look at the future of East Minot, I live there. In all transparency, my father and I own land about a block away from this particular property. I think as it pertains to flood protection, we're probably going to buy out 2 to 3 manufactured home parks, Mr. City Manager, and I think this is a future issue that's going to continue to probably come before this body, and that's why I wanted to ask, is it being discussed now? Is there going to be, if this is denied tonight, are we looking ahead to this potential? Because I'm starting to suspect that maybe these lot rents are being driven up in hopes that people will leave, or as a desire to maybe, I don't know what the purpose would be from the owner of the land to up the value when those buyouts come. But I just wanted to ask that question and see if we're, one, planning ahead, 2, is there going to be an avenue for some of these other additional home owners that are going to come forward and say, we would like to move our property. What is the city going to do to help us?
Right. In the issue of time, we'll try to keep this as close to the topic as we can. Alderman Straight, great questions. But if we could, Mr. Billingsley, as close to the issue on the public hearing that is before us.
Yes, the issue before us this evening is a rezone from R1 to MH. Currently in city code, you can only place a mobile home in a mobile home district. No other zones in the city allow a mobile home. Therefore, the reason for this request for a rezone is to allow the mobile home to be placed on this property. The Zoning Ordinance Steering Committee is working on some updates to our zoning ordinance. One of those, we're going to expand mobile homes into other districts. They're not going to go into the R1 district still, but they could allow, I believe they can go into the ag district along with the rural residential or rural agricultural district as well, which would be out in the 2-mile area outside of city limits, away from the traditional single-family subdivisions you find within the city. So we are making some strides to make it a little bit easier to put mobile homes elsewhere within our 2-mile area. We're still going to try to keep them out of the city limits unless they're in a mobile home district.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Alderman Wolski.
Mayor Sitma, thank you. Mr. Billingsley, kind of a technical question on this specific lot, and I suspect if this neighborhood were developed in this form today, we probably wouldn't allow a lot to exist like this as an island inside a number of other lots. My concern for the purchaser or the general circumstances of this lot is access. It looks to me like the lot is presently being accessed off 42nd. Do we have an access easement through the lot that is presently being accessed?
Yeah, Mayor Sitma, Alderman Wolski, yes, there is an access easement to this property, and there actually used to be a home on this property. It was demolished years ago.
Okay.
So it has been used as residential lot in the past.
Okay.
Further questions for Community Development Director?
Mayor Sitma, I have one other comment I'd like to make. Our planning staff did receive a written protest from one property owner in the neighborhood. City code reads that if more than 20% of the land area within the 300-foot boundary around this site has protesters, then it requires a supermajority vote. This property owner does not have the 20% requirement. The supermajority vote comes into play during the second reading, not the first reading, just to let you know.
Mr. Billingsley.
Okay?
Further questions? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
The public hearing is still open. Please come forward. If you would, state your name and address, and the floor is yours.
Good evening. I'm Larry Plotz. The individual who would like to purchase this property. This is my wife, Colleen, and I want to thank you for the opportunity of speaking this evening. I had mentioned to some that it seems kind of trivial in light of what's going on around us, but we're going to get through this, and then we got to go back to living our normal lives, and this is something that's very important to us. Our goal is to address the possible rezoning of the property at 1015 42nd Street Southeast. I do wish to move a single-wide 16 by 80 manufactured home onto this lot. I fear that, as some heard here, is that the sentiment is that single-wide trailer homes belong in trailer parks. Unfortunately, people such as Colleen and I are being priced right out of these parks. As of January 2020, our rent was increased $48 a month, where we're now paying $518 a month. And it just keeps going up on us almost year after year. If granted permission to purchase this property for our intended purpose, we would realize a savings of approximately $200 per month. We have researched the cost of moving, putting down piers to anchor the trailer, expenses like water, sewer, garbage, and the current tax rate. We would be able to take out a 10-year loan that would cover the cost of purchasing the lot and any moving expenses. The amount we could save is significant to us and would help my wife and I from continuing to experience what is becoming a financial hardship. The location of the lot, as has been talked about here, is landlocked. It's isolated, barely visible from the general public. We have spent time to update our trailer with new siding, new doors, new windows, new flooring, and have added personal touches to turn this trailer into our home. I'm not asking that you allow us to move a trailer. I'm asking that you allow us to move our home. Colleen and I are simply looking for a place to put our home that we can call our own, a place that we can avoid the consistent burden of worrying about how much the rent will be increased next year.
Thank you. I'd just like to add, this is our home. And we take pride in its appearance, the exterior and the interior. And just as a ballpark figure, we have lived here since 2010, and we have paid out over $40,000 in rent, have nothing to show for it. In the next 10 years, at $500 a month, we're going to pay out $6,000, which will be $60,000. So in a matter of less than 20 years, we have paid out $100,000 and have absolutely nothing to show for it. Also, I am sure that if you go around trailer courts right now, you will see all kinds of for sale signs in trailers. It's just getting to where there is no place for us to go. And that's what we're really asking you, is for a place that we can own the property and improve it. We're big gardeners. We love landscaping and flowers and that kind of thing. And we look forward to being able to improve that area. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Platts. Are there any questions? Thank you. Again, this is a public hearing, an opportunity for anyone that is in favor or opposed to the motion that is before us.
Good evening. My name is Curry Ebel. I live at 1020 43rd Street Southeast. I live right behind the property in question. I'm opposed to changing the zone. We are afraid if we let one in, we'll let a floodgate open and the whole lot and neighboring area will be mobile homes. And Alderman Straight, I heard you say that you're familiar with the area. There's a large grove of trees there that we would surely like to keep there, and if there's any further development, that'll all be gone. And we would like to maintain it as it is. So that's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Abel. Any questions? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Again, this is a public hearing for anyone to come forward and speak either in favor or opposed to the motion that is before us. One more time for an opportunity on the public hearing. If not, the recommendation before us is request to change the request denial for the change from R1 to single family district to MH, manufactured home district. I'd be looking for a motion. Alderman Wolski.
Mr. Mayor, I move we close the public hearing and approve the rezoning request.
Second.
We have a motion to close the public hearing and approve the request. We have a motion by Alderman Wolski, second by Alderman Straight. Discussion, but first I'm looking to our city attorney.
Mr. Mayor and members of council, the planning department might have had conditions recommended. I'm not sure. I don't have the agenda. I just want to make sure those are included.
They would be included as a part of my motion, any recommendations of the planning staff.
Thank you. I will look to Mr. Billingsley here for perhaps a little verification there.
Mayor, members of the council, yes, there was one recommendation, one condition placed in the recommendation, and it's a standard condition we place on all rezones, stating that no later than 6 months after the subdivision design has been approved by the city council, the applicant for design approval may submit the final form of the instrument or document to the city engineer, which is to be recorded in the office of recorder of deeds. It's a very standard condition, so I can certainly forward it to city attorney if she needs this for the document that you'll sign if the council approves this matter.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Billingsley.
Okay.
So with that, motion and second is okay with recommendations? Discussion on the motion. Alderman Wolski is the motion maker.
Mayor Sitma, always difficult questions, and the goal of zoning is to reduce as much as possible conflicts among uses of property. This is a neighborhood that I think is very much in flux, many different zoning types in a short radius even from this particular property, and I think it's appropriate to approve this particular use on this lot.
Alderman Straight.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sir, your protest, I can understand and empathize with your concerns. I will say that I've sat up here now for 4 years. I've approved rehab services in neighborhoods where neighbors don't want that. We face challenges. I don't believe this is going to be a tidal wave in the neighborhood. I think this is a one-off that I'll say is probably the eyesore in the neighborhood is the guy that owns a hot dog business and trailers. I've taken a fair amount of ridicule over my life being over there. I've bought adjacent land, tried to clean it up. I think we work really hard and we're still trying to spend money to kind of prove up our corner. I'm looking for neighbors that care. And for the folks that want to move their home, I'm concerned about what's going to happen in the future to many of these neighborhoods and manufactured home parks, and that's why, Mr. Mayor, Mr. City Manager, I'm gonna support this tonight because I think this is kind of a special situation and a one-off where I think some people that want to live there want to be good neighbors, and I believe that's what's going to happen, sir.
Further discussion on the motion. Further discussion? Alderman Pittner.
Thank you, Mayor. I think we've been down this road before a little bit with letting of manufactured mobile homes into established neighborhoods and whatnot. So, again, this will affect the values to some extent, or the perception of that neighborhood by allowing a change like this. I can understand it's hard to see the rents go up and the prices go up. I can sympathize, but there's alternatives out there besides this action. So I will not be supporting this motion tonight.
Further discussion? Seeing none, the motion is before us to close the public hearing and to approve with recommendations by staff the change from R1 to MH Manufactured Home District. Please call the roll.
Wolski?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
No.
Padragula?
Yes.
Straight?
Yes.
Motion is approved. That takes us, or that is the final piece of the final item on the Planning Commission. That then does take us over to number 4 of the consent items. We have 20 different items within consent. I have been asked to pull 4.2-11, which is Ordinance 5474, 4.8, 4.14, and 4.18 of the consent items. I would look to see if there are any further items that need to be pulled at the dais. And are there any other items that would like, someone would like to speak to individually? Alderman Janser.
Mr. Mayor, if there are none besides the ones you identified, I would move consent on the remaining consent
Motion
items.
for consent on the remaining items.
Second.
Second by Alderman Olson. Again, this is consent on all items as recommended with the exception of 4.2-11, 4.8, 4.14, and 4.18. Any discussion on the motion? Any discussion? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Janser?
Yes.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padragula?
Yes.
Straight?
Yes.
Wolski?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes. Motion approved. That takes us to the next item, 4.2-11. This is the ordinance number 5474, amending the 2020 budget regarding the City Hall retaining wall. All of the supporting documents were also attached or provided within the agenda.
Move approval.
Motion by Alderman Olson to approve.
Second.
Second by Alderman Janser. Discussion on the motion. Alderman Wolski, you asked this to be pulled.
Mayor Sitma, obviously I've been opposed in the past, and I'm not going to revisit any of those points. I'll only share that, and my comments on this item, I'm going to share on more than a few items tonight. But I want, I think the council aware of some concerns that have emerged for me in a very short period of time. And that is, given the larger circumstances in the world today and the extraordinary disruption that's taking place related to COVID-19, the revenues that we were projecting and have been previously very comfortable with making assumptions about how we spend and the projects that we program, all of a sudden, in a matter of 7 days, it's very different today than it was a week ago. I'm concerned about sales tax revenues. I'm concerned about oil impact revenues. And obviously, we're not in a situation where we want to panic. But I think it's appropriate to bring this up and be discussing every project, frankly, that has dollars that may not be essential, and to consider maybe not saying no to it, but certainly contemplate putting it on pause until there's a little more clarity in the world and a little less chaos. And so I will reiterate those comments on a couple different items tonight, because I think there are some things that we can certainly push pause on. And on this item, obviously, my opposition has been longstanding, so no surprise that I won't be supporting it.
Further discussion on the motion? Further discussion? Please call the roll.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padragula?
Yes.
Straight?
No.
Wolski?
No.
Sitma?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes.
Motion was approved. 4.8. 4.8 is the cemetery gazebo project. Staff at Rose Hill Cemetery speak regularly with patrons at the cemetery, and occasionally they recommend additions that they would feel would make their experience at the cemetery more enjoyable. One such recommendation was to add a gazebo to provide an area with shade or out of the rain. Cemetery staff has attempted to budget for the past few years, but other more urgent needs sideline the project. The recommendation to council is authorize a budget amendment from the cemetery cash reserves to capital purchases in the amount of $10,000 to complete the gazebo project at Rose Hill Cemetery.
Move approval.
Motion by Alderman Olson to approve.
Second.
Second by Alderman Pittner. Discussion on the motion. Alderman Wolski.
Mayor Sitma, very much in the spirit of what I just shared, I think this is one of those items where it would be appropriate for us to push pause and wait. This is certainly something that's been desired for a long period of time. $10,000 is not an amount that is going to break the city in any great form, but dollars are precious, and this is a moment when I think we should push pause.
Further discussion on the motion. Alderman Straight, and then we'll.
Before Mr. Sorensen, I guess just for clarification, and I can agree with where Mr. Wolski is heading with a number of agenda items, but this was a donation, no, Mr. Sorensen?
Mr. Sorensen.
That is correct, Mr. Straight.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Any further detail, Jason?
No, Mr. Mayor, Alderman Wolski, that's really why I wanted to stand up and just point that out. It's we get these donations from time to time from families that in their estate they'll leave, cash donation for a special project. So that is certainly the case with this. It's a $10,000 donation that they asked us to use for a special project, and that's what we're applying it to.
And Jason, that has to be accounted through reserves. Is that correct on the accounting side?
Mr. Mayor, yeah, it was donated last year. We didn't get the project. We didn't have enough time to get the project built, get the stuff ordered. So since it wasn't allocated, it was funding in 19, but we didn't get the project completed in 19. So that goes back to cash reserves. We're just asking to bring it back into the capital project fund.
Alderman Wolski.
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Sorensen, thank you for the clarification. That is a detail that I missed on the first reading of this, and I'm going to change my mind and support this item.
Thank you, Mr. Sorensen. Any further discussion on the motion? Further discussion? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padrigula?
Yes.
Straight?
Yes.
Wolski?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes.
Motion is approved. 4.14, purchase of the low floor heavy-duty transit bus. In 2015, the Public Works Transit Department bid out and entered into an agreement with the El Dorado National to purchase the one bus at the time, and then an option for up to 5 additional buses over the next 5 years. The funds to purchase this bus were approved in the 2020 budget. The recommendation at the City Council is to approve the purchase of the 2020 El Dorado National California Easy Rider 2 low-floor heavy-duty bus and allow the Public Works Director to sign the purchase order and any other associated forms with this purchase. This is Project 4485.
So moved.
Motion by Alderman Straight.
Second.
Second by Alderman Pittner. Discussion. Alderman Wolski, I think that you had pulled this.
I did. Mayor Sitma, a question for our Public Works staff in terms of, or maybe finance staff, I'm not sure, but related to the circumstances of taking advantage of this bid environment. Dave, maybe you can speak to, is there a timeline or a time frame that we need to be aware of on this?
Good evening, Mr. Lakefield.
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Wolski, I did speak with Director Jonason briefly late this afternoon about this. There's a couple of different things here that are in play. This bus was on a 5-year bid cycle, and this, I believe, is the last year of this bid cycle. In addition to that, 80% of the funding for the purchase of this bus is coming from the federal government via the state. We have already submitted our plan for the next biennium to the state or for this funding. So we potentially could miss out on the existing bid price for the bus, as well as the current funding that is allocated for this. And if that funding is reallocated to some other project, that funding may not be available even in the next biennium. So it could push this project 3 or 4 years into the future.
Any follow-up, Alderman Wolski?
Mayor Sitma, thank you. Dave, do you have a sense of if this was put on hold for 30 days or 60 days, would it potentially still exist in the form that it is now, or is there a hard deadline that's approaching sooner than that?
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Wolski, I don't have the exact cutoff date for when that bid would expire, if there's a hard date on it, if we're approaching that. I know in the packet, it did say that by approving this now, the bus would come online. It's anticipated in October. Mr. Jonason had indicated that there is a likelihood if it was delayed to any extent, the bus may not be available for this year. It would have to be purchased in the upcoming fiscal year for the city.
Alderman Straight.
Mr. Mayor, Dave, I don't know if you'll be able to answer this, but are we replacing a non-handicap accessible bus with a handicap accessible bus? Meaning the low floor, it's got a hydraulics, it kind of moves down to the curb to allow handicap riders, wheelchair accessible?
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Straight, I'm going to go out on a limb here a little bit. I don't know if I see Brian here. I do believe this is a different type of bus.
Okay. Is that correct?
Do you want to come forward, Brian, and maybe address that a little bit?
I think the answer is yes, but I want to make sure.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Alderman Wolski. That bus is a different type bus than what we are currently getting rid of. All of our buses are handicapped accessible, but the older buses are outfitted with a wheelchair lift, where these are a low floor with a ramp, makes accessibility to the passengers much easier. These later model buses also have a new wheelchair securement system, which allows the wheelchair patrons to be in there more secure and be able to secure them more quickly and more safely than previous versions of this bus.
Any follow-up questions? Alderman Straight?
No follow-up, Mr. Mayor, but we had these in Alaska when I lived there for a decade. They're great buses, and I think they're going to get plenty of use, so.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, just a quick follow-up, if I may, on the deadline. The contract, the 5-year contract does expire May 3rd.
Okay.
So we are coming to the close of that time frame where we would have to go out and start a whole new bid process if we did not put this purchase order through relatively quickly.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Further discussion or questions? Any further discussion? Alderman Wolski.
Mayor Sitma, the concerns just continue, so I will reiterate or allow them to stand again. My hunch is that the council is going to make what I think is probably the right decision on this particular issue, but I do want a vote on the record as being opposed, because I think these questions are very important and we need to stay conscious of them. So.
Further discussion? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski,
No.
Sitma,
Yes.
Cancer,
Yes.
Olson,
Yes.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padragula.
Yes.
Motion is approved. That takes us to 418, the Storm Sewer District 123, 10th Street Southwest. The approved plans and call for bid. This is number 4393, the 10th Street Southwest from 37th Avenue to 31st Avenue Southwest, and surrounding areas have long been identified as known storm water problem areas. To address these problems, this project was included in the approved capital improvement plan for 2019 design and 2020 construction. At the August 19, 2019 City Council meeting, Storm Sewer District 123 was created. The engineering report was approved and council directed and the preparation of the plans and specs, and those plans and specs are now complete. 4 recommendations to City Council are as follows. Approve the plans and specifications. Number 2 is authorize the call for bids. Number 3 is set the bond term for 10 years per the Finance Director's recommendations. And number 4, approve the reimbursement resolution. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Motion by Alderman Janser, second by Alderman Pittner. Discussion on the motion. Alderman Wolski.
Mayor Sitma, This is a pretty significant project coming forward. As we're simply calling for bids and testing the market at this point, I'm going to be supportive, but if this gets back to us in short order, and I think this was exactly the type of project that we need to be contemplating saying no to as a result of the changing conditions.
Sir, if you would, please come forward and state your name and address for the record.
Terry Davidson, 800 28th Avenue Southwest. And we feel if this goes through like it's designed now, it's going to cause us a problem. We live down in the lower area. We've got some buildings down there. And I guess before we get into a vote, there's some things I'd like to share with you. I'd like to take you back to 1969. And at that time, we lived down about 2 blocks south of Roosevelt Park. And we got flooded out. We had a small dike around our house. We pumped water for 40 days to save our house. And after the water went down, it took us the rest of the summer, 4 of us, to clean up the house, get it moved back in, get the dike hauled out, and get our yard back in shape. And we feel we've been through a flood, and we don't really care to go through any kind of project like that again. Not saying it would be that bad, but it would cause problems for us. We moved out in 72. We lived down there in 70 and 71. There was another flood threat. And we moved, my folks bought this property out in the country, built a house out there. Now that house sits on 28th Avenue Southwest. Later, along come the bypass, Dakota Square, and the rest of the property out there was developed. At that time, they run all this water down into 31st. And they run it east, down to 7th, to a catch basin. And at that time, our dad gave the city an easement to run that catch basin out into Puppy Dog Coulee, where it's been running ever since and never caused a problem. Now they want to change it, run it on the west side of our property where it can cause us a problem. And I checked down in that lower area if it should flood. We got a building down there and we got a power box down there. And I called the power company thinking that if it got wet, it might be a fire problem. They said not, but it would knock your power out. And I asked how long would it take to get it put back in. They couldn't give me an answer. And I feel that being there's alternative routes to do this, it would be worthwhile to look at that rather than do this and possibly cause us a problem. And if it don't flood us out, all that extra water come down through there might start eroding our property out. And what do we do? So I guess that's what I've got to say.
Thank you, Mr. Davidson. Any questions from council? Alderman Straight.
Mr. Mayor, just for kind of a refresher, maybe Mr. Meyer can speak to Mr. Davidson's, the alternative discussions. I'll say, Mr. Davidson, you were kind enough. I sat in your kitchen with you and your family. I went over your concerns. And so I feel like we owe it to you to kind of hear from Mr. Meyer. I think we had a public discussion, Mr. Mayor, about this back at the auditorium. So it's just a little refresher possibly for all of us.
Can I add to this?
Please.
Sure. That's correct. I was at a previous meeting, and I brought up if there's a problem, would the city reimburse us with any damage? And that was a negative. And I asked, what can we do? And I got the arrogant answer from somebody from the city of getting flood insurance, which I thought was not very good. So there it is.
Thank you, Mr. Davidson. Any further questions? Thank you, sir. I would look to Mr. Meyer for some clarification as city engineer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Derek, if you could pull that PDF up for me, please. Thank you. So first, let me say that, like always, we take Mr. Davidson's and other members of the public's concerns seriously. Our duty as professional engineers is to make sure that we don't damage property or put people in harm's way. That's just what we do, and we take an oath for that. So when these concerns were first brought to our attention at the assessment district public hearing, so this is before our council meeting last fall, we had our engineering team take a look at it just to make sure and double check the math that this wasn't going to be a problem. And if it showed that it was a problem, then we need to regroup. We either need to protect the property or find an option that doesn't cause adverse effects downstream. So I just wanted to reiterate basically what we talked about last fall in August, and then just add a little bit of data behind it so that hopefully you're comfortable with what we've come up with. If you can follow, maybe. There we go. The cursor isn't showing up very well here on this PDF.
There you go.
But if you see kind of the red-shaped outline near the mall, that represents the watershed for this storm sewer district. If you look at that in the grand scheme of the overall watershed that flows through this point, so Mr. Davidson's properties is just downstream of 10th Street where it goes to the mall. The district area is approximately just a hair under 1% of the overall watershed area. So Puppy Dog Coulee upstream of 10th Street is about 15 square miles. This watershed that would go through there is 0.185 square miles. So about just a hair under 1% of the total district area. What we're doing is we are taking the outfall from Puppy Dog, and instead of going directly to 7th Street, which is where the existing one is, we're rerouting that over to 10th Street, running a pipe north and discharging into the coulee at that location. This saves the district payers about $400,000, which then also saves the city of Minot and our ratepayers about $200,000. So it's a good option because it reduces overall project cost. So in order to check that math to make sure that there are no downstream impacts, what we do is we, pull this up, go one page down for me, please. We model this watershed and then we create what's called a hydrograph, which plots the flow versus time of the district. So if you can see the orange line that goes up and down, that is the flow rate over time of the water that comes out of this district through that pipe that's just upstream of Mr. Davidson's property. What we want to make sure doesn't happen is the top of that orange curve. We do not want that to line up with the top of any of the blue curves that go through there. Those blue curves are the flow of water over time. The first peak is the one that comes basically from the mall in the Green Acres area. And then the second, much larger peak, that's the peak that comes about 12 hours later from the rest of the 15 square miles out in the county. So as long as that orange line, the top of the orange line and the top of the blue lines don't match, then our water is out of the district and out of the watershed before the other runoff volumes get there. That's the key point that we look for when we model these watersheds. And we made sure in this case that happens. The other last point I wanted to make, just to keep this in mind, is this here is the hydrograph for the 10-year storm. That's the max output that outfall pipe can handle. So anything over a 10-year storm, essentially our streets become a detention pond. And that's pretty common for how storm sewer systems are developed in urban areas. So we're not doing anything out of the ordinary. So what would end up happening then is our streets would hold that water, and then it gets released over time as our storm sewers catch up. This is a significant improvement over what we have existing today, where even on a 2-year event, we have significant street flooding. So this district is a good project and will help alleviate the drainage problems that we have today, but according to our models, also protects Mr. Davidson's property because the flow that would come through his property from other areas of the city or the county are far and above higher flow rate than what we're going to have. I'd be happy to answer any questions, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer. Any questions for our city engineer? Alderman Straight.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Lance, just can you reiterate what else is going to happen with this storm district? I think anybody that's driving behind the mall is going to realize that 31st is terribly torn up. There's going to be some street improvements as well, some curb and gutter improvements as well, correct?
That's correct, Mr. Mayor and Alderman Straight. As part of this project, the entire intersection of 31st Avenue and 10th Street will be removed and replaced because the storm sewer will be reconfigured in that intersection. It will actually raise it about 1.5 feet so that it's not such a bowl on a large rain event. Obviously, if you've driven through there recently, there's really nothing left of that pavement. And so we'll reconstruct it, make sure it drains adequately, and then build a good pavement section in that'll stand up.
Further questions for our city engineer? Thank you, Mr. Meyer.
You're welcome.
Further discussion on the motion before us? Some final comments on new information?
I would just follow up on what Lance said. With his graphs and that, he's assuming by the time that water is down there, it'll be gone before the rest of the water gets there. And they're going to do some changing at 16th Street. What water comes is going to come more. And what if it don't disappear like he plans that it should? What's the consequences of it? Too much water. They can't get out of there quick enough. So I just wanted to, I hope we're not the collateral damage for this thing when there's other routes that could be done.
Thank you, Mr. Davidson.
You bet.
Further discussion on the motion before us? Alderman Straight.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Davidson, I can appreciate your concern. You have a very unique piece of property. I appreciate the invite to come and take a look at the project. I want to believe that I have to trust the smarter people in the room. So I just want you to know that I'm going to support this tonight in part because there are some other aspects that have to be repaired in the area and we have to address it. And but so I know that's no reassurance to you, sir, but I do want you to know that I appreciate your concerns and I want to trust our engineering team that we're doing the right thing, sir. So
I understand that.
Mr. Davidson, if you would come to the podium for a remark and then we'll proceed.
Sure. I'm not against the project. I can see where it's needed. I just don't think it's being dumped in the right place. That's the only thing. There's two other ways that it could be done, but for some reason, and I can understand this is the cheaper one for the city, but we might serve the consequences of it. So, and I appreciate you coming over and listening to us anyway.
Sure. Further discussion on the motion? Further discussion? We have a motion and a second to approve as recommended. Please call the roll.
Dancer,
Yes.
Olson,
Yes.
Pitt,
Yes.
Padragula,
Yes.
Straight,
yes.
Wolski,
Yes.
Sitma.
Yes. Motion is approved. That wraps us up on the consent items in Section 4, now into Section 5. These are the action items. 5.1 is the compost site lease agreement. The City of Minot has been utilizing a site owned by Trinity Church to maintain a compost location. For the past years, it has been an informal agreement, and from time to time, there are questions about the funds being paid or other issues. This year, it was decided that an agreement should be more formal to protect both parties. The recommendations to City Council was to approve the lease agreement between the City of Minot and Trinity Church for the purpose of a compost site location, and for the council to authorize the mayor to sign the agreement on behalf of the city.
Move approval.
Motion by Alderman Olson to approve.
Second.
Second by Alderman Pittner. Discussion on the motion. Discussion on the motion. Seeing no discussion, please call the roll.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padrigula?
Yes.
Straight?
Yes.
Wolski?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes.
Dancer?
Yes.
Motion is approved. 5.2, the amendment to ordinance 23-58 to reduce the crime of carrying a loaded firearm in certain vehicles to an infraction and provide for an additional exception per state law. The section 2358, closely mirrors the North Dakota State Century Code 62-62.1-02-10, which was amended in 2019. Presently, section 2358 is inconsistent with state law, and this proposed ordinance remedies that. The recommendation to City Council was to approve and pass an ordinance on first reading, amending section 2358 of Division 1, Article 4, Chapter 23 of the City Minot Code of Ordinances to reduce the crime of carrying a loaded firearm in certain vehicles to an infraction and to provide for an additional exception per state law and authorize the mayor to sign the ordinance.
So moved.
Motion by Alderman Janser to approve. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Alderman Wolski. Discussion. Alderman Wolski.
Brief question for our city attorney, this clarification, affirmation. This just brings us in line with state law, essentially mirroring what's on state books?
Mr. Mayor and Alderman Wolski, yes, that's correct.
Discussion on the motion. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing no discussion, please call the roll.
Janser?
Yes.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padrigula?
Yes.
Straight?
Yes.
Wolski?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes. That takes us to, motion is approved. That takes us to 5.3, Scott Aviation. Since the inspection of all leased properties at the airport conducted in May 2019, the airport has been working with Wilson Scott and his legal counsel to bring the building and the use of the hangar into compliance with local code and FAA compliance. These efforts have failed, and the airport enterprise believes that the best path forward is to terminate the current lease and not offer renewal upon the May 5th, 2020 expiration of same. The recommendation to council is to direct city staff to move forward with delivering notice of breach of terms of the current lease with Wilson Scott pursuant to the termination clause of the present fixed-base operator lease with the city due to his failure to, 1, keep the building clean and orderly and free from all debris, and 2, failure to maintain an aeronautical purpose on the premise, and to terminate the lease if the breach is not cured. Documents that we're also supporting are both attached and available online. Is there a motion?
Move approval.
Motion to approve by Alderman Olson. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderman Janser. Discussion on the motion. Is there any discussion from the audience on this proposal? If you would, state your name, and if you do represent, or who you represent, please, sir.
Yes, thank you, Mayor and council members. My name is Mark Rasmussen, and I reside at 504 25th Street Northwest. I am the attorney for Wilson Scott, who has come all the way up here from Oklahoma to protect his Scott Aviation leasehold interest in this matter. Now, your airport director's 22520 letter indicated his proposal on this matter, and we responded strongly by a March 13, 2020 letter. Now, it's our position that your airport director has failed to distinguish between a city lease and a city license. We understand that Wilson Scott has not operated an aircraft business out of his hangar since 20 years ago, when the city denied his city license. However, the city reconsidered that 20-year-old decision and unanimously approved the renewal of Wilson Scott's license for another 20 years and another 20-year option to renew. And without prejudice for Mr. Scott's future application for a city license to operate an aircraft business out of his hangar. Now, you will note that the city inspector conducted a May investigation. At that time, he recommended that we either repair or replace all damaged walls or demolish the building. Now, Mr. Scott came all the way back from Oklahoma in October 2019 and constructed all the remedial repairs requested by the city inspector and airport manager. Now, after completing these repairs, the city inspector again recommended that repair or replace all damaged walls or demolish the building. Now, it was our position that the hangar walls are structurally sound and are not a dangerous building or condition under City Ordinances Chapter 9. Now, the city director requested that we employ a licensed architect to support our position, which we did. And the city architect filed his report with the city building department last Friday, which indicated the structure is in relatively good condition. Now, your city assessor appears to agree with our position since he has valued the hangar building at $154,000 fair market value in his 2019 Ward County real estate tax statement. Now, it is our position that your airport director is trying to take away the private property of Wilson Scott without just compensation under our Constitution. Mr. Wilson can either sell or sublease his hangar to someone who has a city license to operate a business out of his hangar, or Mr. Wilson can himself come back to North Dakota and apply for a city license to operate a business out of his hangar. We therefore request that, based on the your airport director's Article 5 alternatives, that this council approve the prior March 6, 2000 unanimous city council decision to approve the 20-year extension of his lease and with the 20-year option to renew. I note in that motion that Alderman Padragula was even voted in favor of that motion at the time. So we feel that the city should follow the March 2000 recommendation of the council, which was unanimously passed, and approve the extension of his lease with another 20-year option to purchase. Thank you for your time. I'll answer any questions you might have.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Rasmussen. Questions from any of the council members? Alderman Padragula.
Thank you for noticing that I was on the council, and I've forgotten this item. It was 20 years ago. But I was wondering if your client what use your client is making of the premises and his license or whatever at this point. What's he doing with the building?
Well, right now it's just used according to the uses of his lease of storage of aircraft, storage of parts, and any other aircraft purpose.
Okay, thank you.
Which is stated in his lease. Now, like I said, if he chooses to operate a business, then he can sell his hangar or sublease it out. But he needs his lease to sell his business or operate under a city license.
Further questions for Mr. Rasmussen? Alderman Pidner.
I guess, thank you, Mayor. I guess, again, I asked what the aeronautical purpose is in the recommendation. It states that terms of the current lease with Wilson Scott pursuant to the termination clause of his present fixed based operator lease with the city of Minot due to failure to, number 2, to maintain an aeronautical purpose. And I guess maybe I'm missing what the aeronautical purpose is operating.
Well, that the aeronautical purpose is included in a city license. That would be, you know, flight instructions and stuff like that, but under the lease, he says his lease is able to use for storage and repairs, parts, and any other airport business, but not those items which would be included in a city license.
Alderman Straight.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Rasmussen, sir, how often is your client from Oklahoma coming and utilizing the aeronautical use equipment or the space?
Well, he had a building manager who was responsible for the building to maintain it. And you can ask him if you want his intentions. Do you want to speak, Wilson?
Yes, sir. Mayor, and it was you, Mr. Straight, that asked the question, right?
Yeah, I was just curious, sir. It seems like there's a discussion about the aeronautical use, but I'm just curious how often you're here.
Over the years, I've rented the building out. In fact, you had North Star Aviation in the building for a good period of time. But it didn't work out. And maybe some of that's my fault, where I was a long-distance landowner, you might say, you know. Well, and since then, there's been various people in town that have rented the hangar space. And it's only been in the last year, maybe year and a half, that I haven't allowed anybody to rent the inside of the hangar with aircraft, which is why they're getting this idea that I'm not renting the hangar out. If it was someone of means that could afford it, I'd be more than willing to rent it out. It may even be just as much to sell it. You know, I bought that place on an SBA loan, and I paid every penny of it. Nobody helped me, I paid every penny of it. And I'm not a wealthy person. So, and I taught myself to fly, and these same B-52s that are sitting out here now, I spent 26 years maintaining them when I started when I was 18 years old. And I worked my way up to where I'm an engineer with Boeing now. And I never intended to stay away permanently from Minot. That was never my intention. When Rockwell took me out to the B-1 program, they liked what I did well enough that it's been a yearly lease of my services every year since then, and we're talking 34 years now. I don't know what else to tell you with it. I've paid my taxes with it. When I bought that place, I bought it when John Hoven was the president of First Western. Now he's a senator. Well, and the only reason I bring that up is that when they offered it to me, it was 5 years arrears on taxes. So you weren't getting the money. How did they get paid? I paid them to you. The other little notes that went along with the business, I paid them. So it's not just, a couple $100,000, and I invested a lot of time in that place. And the only overture on doing the building in started when I said a year and a half ago, I'm coming back. That's when it all started.
Thank you, sir.
I think that's probably said too much, so I'll.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Any questions for Mr. Scott? Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Any further questions for Mr. Rasmussen? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Oh, yes, that is exactly who I'm looking for. Stephanie, if you would, got a few questions about some of the timelines or process here, if you would elaborate a little bit for us.
Certainly. So first, to just address a couple of comments that Mr. Rasmussen made here. We completely understand that there's a distinction between an FBO license or a fixed-based operator license and a fixed-based operator lease. The issue here is with the lease. City staff, after doing their inspection, has observed two distinct, what we believe could be breaches of this particular lease that we wanted to put on the City Council's radar. And the reason why we've waited so long is because we wanted to afford Mr. Scott an opportunity to cure these particular breaches. The lease at hand, the term expires on May 5th, 2020. So there is a little bit of time here in between the expiration of the lease, but we wanted to make sure we put it on the council's radar now so you have some time to consider these breaches that we're going to put before you. And as the memo extensively articulates, we believe that there's a lack of an aeronautical purpose, and then there's concerns about the condition of the particular building. As Mr. Rasmussen indicated, this Friday we did receive an inspection report, and I think Maria has copies of it if you did not receive a copy of the inspection report from the architect. Just at initial glance, I received a copy of this morning, but I do have a couple of concerns. One that is not signed and sealed by the architect, and that's something that maybe you have on hand. Mr. Rasmussen is a signed and sealed copy that's required by North Dakota law. So I mean, we'd first request that that be provided, and then second of all, well, maybe I'll let our building inspector answer more questions about this inspection report if you have any concerns about it. But as far as the timeline goes, I know Mr. Rasmussen indicated that North Star Aviation had once occupied the building, and it appears as though they vacated back in 1990 according to the timeline that we have here. This concern about the building and the lack of an aeronautical purpose, as you can see from the timeline, has been going on for quite some time now. I draw your attention to some correspondence back in November 15th of 1999 where Wilson Scott sent a letter to the airport director indicating he was going to return to Minot no later than December of 2001 to resume operations, which prompted a letter from then airport director Mike Ryan, which I believe was about 3 airport directors ago, to the city manager, Wayne, at the time, that he recommended, based upon the improvements that Mr. Scott made back in 1999, to approve the lease, but that if Mr. Scott did not return to Minot to do business by that time, that the city of Minot cancel both his license and his lease. To my knowledge, I don't believe that Mr. Scott has an FBO license to cancel, but there is this lease at hand and there are these existing issues here as well. So that's a brief overview of what I just wanted to bring to light to the council. If you have any questions for myself or Maria Romanek from the airport and Luke Tillemer are here as well if you have questions for them.
Thank you, Stephanie. Any questions for our Assistant City Attorney? If you would, Stephanie, just briefly on an overview as the importance of the aeronautical use within the facility itself.
Absolutely. So, and Maria can speak on this as well, but my understanding is that we've made certain grant assurances to the Federal Aviation Administration based upon the use of all of our airport property having an aeronautical use. At this time, our airport staff is not able to identify the aeronautical use that Mr. Scott is using this property for. So our grant assurances are then potentially put at risk because we've accepted money from the FAA based upon those assurances. As far as a timeline that the FAA could become involved in this, I can't advise on that. I'm sure there's larger issues that the federal government's dealing with at this time, but it is on our radar and it's something that's been brought to our attention at this time, so we wanted to make sure we brought it to the council's attention as well.
Thank you. Any other questions? Alderman Patagula.
Thank you. You presented a very articulate kind of response, but I wish the airport director were here in a sense, because it sounds like it's a campaign to try to tighten up our compliance with these regulations from the FAA. And I guess the comment I'd make here is Is there something that we can do to meet in the middle? I mean, I certainly don't want to jeopardize FAA funding and other things, but this came up with another property at the airport, within the past year, and we were able to work out a deal. And I guess I'm wondering if there's something that, there's some possibility of negotiations here. I guess.
And Alderman Padrigola, members of the council, we can certainly continue to negotiate on this. My concern with bringing it before the council at this time is that this lease is going to expire on May 5th, and they've asked for a 20-year renewal, which is based upon the terms and conditions that the council can set at the time of the renewal. So despite the fact that the lease itself, which is included in your packet, does have an option to renew for 20 years, it does appear as though you can set certain terms and conditions based upon that particular renewal. So that's some kind of food for thought for the council to consider moving forward in this respect. We can definitely continue to negotiate, but these are the two primary concerns, is the condition of the premises, which again, I believe Inspector Tillum is here and can answer questions about that. My understanding is they haven't been back out to the site since this inspection that Mr. Bexel, Architect Bexel, has conducted. So I would believe at the very least they would want to get back on site and see if they can make the same observations that Mr. Bexel has made. But as far as an aeronautical use, we have yet to receive an explanation in that regard. So with the Lukey's, they did come forward with an acceptable aeronautical use for what they were planning on using with the airport, which the airport staff could get behind. And at this point, we don't have that same offer here from Mr. Scott that's been easily identifiable for us to get behind it. So that's why we wanted to bring this before the council at this time, so you have some time to look at it.
And if I remember correctly, I was a little skeptical about cutting the prior lease off, but it seemed like it provided needed momentum to enable people to work out a compromise.
Mm-hmm.
So it worked.
Alderman Straight.
Mr. Mayor, Ms. Holheim, has the aeronautical use definition changed as a result of, there's a lot that's changed in this country in 20 years, especially with all of the security concerns. I'm wondering how that then plays, and is that ultimately part of this concern that you're having that we need to flush that out with Mr. Scott?
I'm not well versed on how that definition has changed over the course of the Wilson Scott lease. Maria Romanek may be more familiar with how that may have changed, but we have provided information to Mr. Scott on the FAA use policy on the use of airport property for aeronautical purposes. So it's not something that we've been hiding the buck on what our position of an aeronautical use is at all. And again, I don't believe that they've necessarily received any explanation as to what they plan on using the property for at a future event either. So I'll let Maria.
Sure. Again, good evening, Mayor Sitma and members of the council. My name is Maria Romanek. As far as the definition of an aeronautical purpose, there isn't an explicit definition, but we did provide some guidelines last summer after we conducted these inspections to each hangar tenant that was not within compliance as far as we could see, and it states the indefinite storage of aircraft is not one of those items. So we're under the impression that, yes, he does have aircraft in there, but they are not active. They may be registered, but we don't see them coming and going, and there's just no activity in and out of the hangar from what we can tell. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Alderman Wolski.
Question for Ms. Stallheim. In the event the council takes this action tonight and directs staff to move forward with delivering notice of breach of terms, does that prevent us from continuing the conversation with Mr. Scott to potentially, cure or find an aeronautical use that might allow him to, within the period yet prescribed, maintain the lease?
So the mechanics of this lease are actually, they're lightning fast. So what we have to do is first give them 5 days of written notice of the breach, and then they have 5 days to cure the breach. If they have 5 days to cure the breach, then they're fine, they're in good standing with the lease, and then the only decision before the council is whether or not you want to grant them a renewal. But if they are unable to cure within 5 days, then it moves on to a decision of whether or not you're going to terminate the lease. Now, this is another lease where the city owns the land underneath the building and the building is owned by Mr. Scott. So then the lease requires that he has 60 days to remove the building unless he can articulate some reason why he can't do that within 60 days. But the lease does put a limit on that. If he can reasonably remove it within 120 days, it's fine, but in no instance will that time allowed to be extended beyond 120 days. So there is a limit there that he would have to remove his property.
Further questions for Assistant City Attorney? Thank you, Stephanie. Is there anyone else that would like to step forward on this matter? Mr. Scott.
I wanted to respond on a little bit of what she said about aeronautical purpose. When we did the lease, we knew that I have 3 aircraft in there that I've maintained that are my personal ones. And and she's absolutely correct. They're registered, and whether they're flyable or not, I don't think is really the point. There's 3 aircraft total in there that would have to come out and go. Now, does it mean that I can take and rent out the hangar? I've been approached by 3 separate people, Executive Air, Trinity, Warren Peach, all wanting to rent the building. Now, what they're wanting to put in there is like insecticide and that sort of thing. Now, is that aeronautical purposes? It is such a vague deal here, and I found myself culpable when I say, okay, yeah, I'll rent it out to you, and then they load up a bunch of X-rated insecticide in there or something. I really have problems with that, and I really would like to know what they wound up with the hobby shop next door to me over there. I mean, what did they actually do to reach an agreement? None of that was published, and maybe it can't be. I have no idea. But it's still questions in my mind. And to take and wait until March the 20th in the dead of the winter and say you got 5 days to fix it. And the reason that I think that was done is because in October, when the airport was closed out here, and it hit the headlines, that's when we repaired the outside of the building and put the seal the cracks and put the metal and all. That team of guys I had up here did that on that day. So I sort of look at it with one eye, I mean, we need some more time in there, I told Mr. Faulkner, when I came up and visited with him, I told him that my intentions were, as soon as Boeing got out of this spiral that's happening, that I was going to be back in force. And then all of a sudden we get a 5-day fix it in the dead of the winter in March. I can hardly make it around out here the last 2 days at 13 degrees. Then be told that I've got to tear the walls down and fix them. And I even, that's another deal. I even told them, if you give me about 3 years, when I get moved back in, I'll replace those walls. And the other engineers laugh at me at the company. They say, all them walls are up there for is to stop the wind. So I just need the time, and I think one of you suggested that. And I don't think 5 days in the dead of the winter is the answer unless you just want to go ahead and take it and do it.
Thank you, Mr. Scott.
Yes, sir.
Further discussion on the motion, Ms. Stallheim, you have some new information.
I just want to point out one thing to the council here. This 5-year term is a 5-year notice, or excuse me, 5-day notice is a term in the lease that Mr. Scott signed. That's not an arbitrary notice that our office picked out or the council has just picked out. It's a term of the lease that he signed. So I just wanted to clarify that with the council.
Thank you. If you would, your name and position or affiliation for the record.
My name is Luke Tillema. I'm the building official for the city of Minot. Mayor Sitma and city council, I just want to speak to some of the stated so-called repairs that were made. Our initial inspection report was done in May, and I can draw your attention to that. The date on there is May 12th, I believe. In there is some pretty extensive pictures of what the inspector found and some of the damage to the building. The second inspection was done after we got wind that the repairs were made. Although there was no building permit pulled, which you would expect in a case like this to repair structural damage, it appears that the problem just got covered up. Though Mr. Bexell's report states that he thought that the building looked sound, but he couldn't see much because most of the damage was covered. If you have any questions for me, I just wanted to make those statements.
Thank you, Mr. Tillman.
You bet.
Alderman Patagula.
Just a question for you. When you're making structural repairs to a building, do you have to get a building permit?
Mayor Sitma, Alderman Padragula, yes, you would. That would have to be designed by a professional, architect or structural engineer, and a permit would have to be pulled and that would have to be inspected. So it was determined that the work was done to the design.
So is there some sort of penalty for violation of this?
There would be, I believe it's a Class B misdemeanor.
Thanks.
Alderman Straight.
Mr. Mayor, I appreciate Mr. Tillman bringing up the photos in the inspection report, and I guess I have a question maybe back to the city assistant attorney about aeronautical use. And if I'm seeing in my pictures, there's a watercraft in the hangar. Is that true? Am I looking at the right pictures?
I believe that was in the initial inspection, and my understanding is that the boat has been removed from the property.
All right, thank you.
Correct?
I believe so.
Yeah.
I believe it's been.
Any further questions for Inspector?
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Can I say one more thing, sir?
Mr. Rasmussen.
Yes, Mayor and council members, my response to the building inspector is that there were no structural repairs required or needed for a permit. And all he did was seal up some cracks and put on aluminum siding for a more attractive appearance to his building. Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion on the motion that is before us to deliver a notice of breach of the terms that are outlined on the screen. Further discussion. Alderman Wolski.
Mr. Mayor, this is the second time we've been through these things, and I appreciate the council's patience with the process and discovering an attempt to get it right. I think in our last circumstance, we followed the advice of our team. We started the clock. The process moved forward from there, and I feel comfortable doing the same again in this circumstance. I'm going to support the motion tonight.
Any further discussion? Alderman Straight.
I'll let it go, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Last call. Please call the roll.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padragula?
Yes.
Straight?
Yes.
Wolski?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes.
Janser.
Yes.
Motion is approved. 5.4 on our agenda is the City Hall Technical Team Recommendation 4466. As part of the NDR program, staff have been investigating potential City Hall locations within downtown. Within downtown, 2 buildings are available that fit or nearly fit the requirements of the city, and those buildings are the former M Building, the Midwest Federal Building, and the Wells Fargo Building. City Hall technical team has reviewed the technical reports and conducted a walkthrough of these buildings. There are 2 recommendations that are before us and also on the screen. The City Hall technical team recommendations for the council is to enter into a due diligence and purchase negotiations for the former Wells Fargo building. Number 2 is to pass an ordinance to increase the engineer professional service contracts expenditures and revenue for the City Hall building analysis, which will be funded with the budgeted capital purchases for the new City Hall. Documents are also attached. I would look for a motion, and if not, we could certainly take discussion on this prior.
I'll move.
Motion by Alderman Patagula to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderman Olson. Good evening, Mr. Meyer.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. With me tonight, I have Mr. Doug Larson from JLG Architects. And Mr. Larson wanted to just hit a couple high points in the report and open it up to any questions that you may have for him and his team.
Okay. Any quick questions for our city engineer? If not, we also have Mr. Larson, correct?
Correct.
Correct. Mr. Larson here to answer further questions or to touch on some high points and otherwise. Thank you, Mr. Meyer. Good evening, Mr. Larson.
Mr. Hackett, the keyboard isn't working to allow us to advance the PDF. Okay. We'll work through it.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, City Councilman. My name is Doug Larson. I'm with JLG Architects. I was the project manager for this particular analysis. I guess when we first applied, the city put out an RFQ for assessment services to look at these 2 buildings. We applied. As part of that task, let's see if this will advance for me. Yes, on this sheet you can see the scope of work was defined in the RFQ. There were 6 tasks. Those tasks were completed. I would say that we did not go real deep into task number 4, which was review the feasibility of moving a column location within the M building to maximize the space for public assembly. Now, the reason was a couple of items. When we walked through that particular building, our structural engineer looked at how that building was constructed. And as we got into the initial estimates, although it was technically feasible to do that, it just, in light of the other costs that were involved with that building, it just wasn't looked at as economically feasible. So my only explanation on task number 4 is it really didn't make much difference whether you removed columns at the top of that building or at the bottom. If you removed at the top, structure would have to be reinforced all the way down to footings and foundations. If you did at the bottom, we'd have to support everything above. Again, technically feasible, but not economically feasible. So you'll notice in the estimates that item is not a line item in that particular thing. So just want to recognize my team. Again, we were JLG Architects. We were kind of project managers for a group of professionals that included Prairie Engineering of Minot, who assessed mechanical, electrical, and plumbing in both buildings. CW Structural Engineers, who did the structural assessments. Materials Testing Services, who did the environmental assessments. And we also had AE2S, who are civil engineers on our team. We didn't require them to actually physically walk those sites. They're both downtown sites. What we used them for was some advice on costs if we needed to run fire sprinkler and other things into the buildings. So that's a little background information. I guess with that, the front end of the report is just information common to both buildings. I'd only touch on zoning compliance. I can make it there. So zoning compliance, both lots are zone C3, which is central business district. I guess the long and short of a central business district is there are no required setbacks and there's no required off-street parking. And those are two things that kind of restrict building size on other lots in town. So we didn't see any issues with zoning compliance in this building. I'm going to move on a little bit to Big M. Both these buildings structurally are suited for the purpose that we analyzed them for, so there'd be no structural modifications necessary for either building to support, an office space or city hall. I guess the level of finish that we were asked to consider was a modern office space. What's the cost of modern office space if these buildings were gutted and repurposed into city hall? So you'll notice in the cost estimates that we use the same format. Some of the numbers for furniture and such are the same under soft costs. I think the major things on the Big M building got to be abatement issues. We had cost estimates from abatement companies who looked at the reports that were existing prior to our walkthrough, and those ranged from anywhere from $2 to $5 million. Time frame for abatement was a little over a year, and that had to do with the number of components that have an asbestos fire proofing on structural and floor decks and such. When it comes to major building components, which is mechanical, electrical, plumbing, roof, curtain wall, we viewed it all as kind of end of useful life. The building was built in 1963. It's got some energy issues with curtain wall and roof. I think some of the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing problems have been exacerbated a little bit by the fact that those systems have been turned off since 2011, 2012. And I guess we looked at the use of City Hall as kind of a single user option so that you're not able to spread energy costs and other things among multiple tenants. So we just thought that for that building, for one tenant to be saddled with those types of operating costs might be a little unreasonable. Code compliance, construction type, again, is okay for the intended use. It's a high-rise building. It's going to need a sprinkler system. It currently has a fire line in there, but it's only servicing the lower two levels. We need to maintain the fire rating on the building for it to continue to be used as an office building. So if we remove all that asbestos fireproofing, we've got to replace it, again, with appropriate rating. And it also needs a secondary fire escape stairs. If you toured the building, you notice that both fire escape stairs are in the center, and it doesn't meet code for required separation. Our probable costs, which I'm going to try to scroll down to that estimate. There we are. I think the top half of this estimate indicates $29,064,640 for construction costs. The stuff on the lower part are things you just incur as an owner, architectural engineering fees and the like, furniture costs, surveys, testing, all that other stuff. I guess in the end, that 29 million divided by the amount of square feet available in that building is $352.67 a square foot, which is in excess of what we would consider the cost of a new building. And that's really the summary for the M building. Move on now to the there we go. The Wells Fargo building. Again, the standard for the estimate was modern office space. Both buildings structurally sound for the appropriate use. Again, asbestos abatement, when we toured the building, we thought we might have some issues with certain materials that we observed. As we went through the report and reviewed some of the initial information, the city did authorize us to have a number of materials tested because the expense was pretty low. Those all came back negative. So of all the suspicious materials we observed, there was no asbestos-containing material in that building that we're aware of. Both buildings had no presence of lead paint. They were tested preliminarily for that. As far as your major building components, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, roof, curtain wall, again, the roof is 10 years old. The warranty is up. It's a 60 mil EPDM roof, so it's probably good for 10 years beyond this, which we would typically have a warranty on. We had replacement in the estimate just because it's a fresh start. We make sure the building's well insulated. We could pull that up. And again, a number of these things might be optional with this building, but part of our contractor team was Fargo Glass. The windows in that building are obviously a 70-era window. It's also reflective bronze glass. If that ever breaks, you can't replace that and match it. So there's money in there for window replacement. Again, it's kind of an optional thing if you choose to go that way, if this is your building of choice. The mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems are all good. It's a heat pump system. It's still a type of system we use in modern construction right now. And we feel that it is suitable to extend into the expected usable life of this building. Code compliance, again, construction type is okay. It's built like a fortress. It's all poured concrete. Fire sprinkler system is not required, but if you did not install one, all your public corridors would have to be fire rated 1 hour. So we have money in the estimate to put a fire sprinkler system in there to give you a little more flexibility in how it's used. The elevators aren't in compliance with ADA, so we've got money in the estimate also for possibly relocating those elevators to the central escalator location. It would be a little less structural hijinks for us to get them in there. And there's a pit there already that we could reuse. And again, summary of probable costs for this building. Same format as the others. $12.8 million. It works out to $164.32 per square foot, which we would consider in a normal range for a kind of a demolition and remodeling work. And I guess there's not a lot other things to talk about. I mean, the cost difference kind of even surprised our estimator when we first went up there. He thought the estimate for the M building might be a little high, but after the walkthrough, you had to reassess that pretty quickly. So I guess I'm open to any questions if you have any. We certainly appreciate the work, and hopefully you're satisfied with the work we did.
Thank you, Mr. Larson, and certainly appreciate the expediency on how quickly it was done. And to my surprise, and I think a few others, that it was a little more in depth than we had initially even anticipated with the quick turnaround. Any questions for Mr. Larson regarding the assessments? Alderman Patagula.
Just a comment to him and city staff, particularly our engineer. I was very impressed with both reports, and taking a couple of hours to tour the buildings and crawl everywhere pretty much was very, very informative to me. And I really appreciate the expert team you had available to us, and the numbers plus the eyes-on experience really made my mind up for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We, I guess, one of the other bits of information we had was a program that was put together for the city on possible space use. And I think after reviewing that program, we weren't asked to really comment on that or design space or anything on that order. But I think both locations, with a little tweaking of your program, could fit City Hall needs pretty comfortably.
Further questions for Mr. Larson? Alderman Pittner.
Thank you, Mayor. Not for Mr. Larson, but for Lance. If everyone's. Lance, can you remind the council, because I think it was brought to us before, because I think our decision's kind of been made as far as whether or not the Big M building is feasible at this point with the cost, but now my thought goes from this location, expanding onto this. I feel like we've had some options before, or the Wells Fargo building. Can you expand on, or remind the council maybe what some of those costs or options were in this location?
Yeah, certainly, Mr. Mayor and Alderman Pittner, several months ago during the summer, our office put just a concept sketch together, really, that, drew some boxes and put some cost to it, just to look at our existing campus here and what options we may have to either add on or build to the south. So that's kind of where we stopped. It's more of a line on a paper and taking the space needs that were generated and then trying to draw a box, if you will, that would fit that and try to put a number to it. I think we used for new construction $300 a square foot, and then that would include all costs, engineering, architectural fees. Obviously, we would own the land, so we don't have acquisition costs, but we were trying to encompass everything that we could think of in that recommendation.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions for a city engineer? Alderman Straight.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Lance, I'm sure we've asked this in this discussion, but can we build up in this building?
Mr. Mayor and Alderman Strayed, I don't believe so. Just looking at the structure and, we kind of run into the same problem with some of these other buildings like M building, trying to move columns around. Footings are generally not designed for extra loading unless you plan that up front, and I can't. Now, the plans are really old, right? So, but I can't find anything in there that would suggest that they had visions of expanding up, which is probably why in the, I think, 90s, they expanded to the south.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Alderman Patagula.
If I recall correctly, I don't know how the applicable this is to City Hall versus police station part of this building, but when I was in the City Hall, or excuse me, the police station remodeling committee some 20 years ago, there was no room on top for that building. This is a little bit different, but that was just not an option back then, at least for that side.
Sure, that would make sense.
Yeah.
Yep.
Further questions for our city engineer? Thank you, Lance.
You're welcome.
Further discussion on the motion that is before us. Alderman Straight.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to just speak on a few things I've been thinking about, and I thanks to you now, sir, you've put it in my head that the mayor and I went to Fargo last week, and we got to see their fancy new $19 million city hall.
29.
29, sorry, million. Thank you. I'm glad that you just corrected me. So there were some elements of that I've been a naysayer on this project a little bit, clearly, but there are things that we clearly need to have in a city hall moving forward, and I think that kind of reinforced it for me. However, where I'm at still, and I guess I look to you, Mr. Mayor, in the conversation, and I clearly have heard from the city manager before about his 3 experiences building out a city hall, and it can be a contentious issue. To Alderman Wolski's point earlier tonight, that we are in some very different times, and I'm incredibly mindful of the fact that as a council member, and in particular as our community as a whole, we've been through 2011 and we're going through whatever we're going through now. But I'm mindful that we are in the process of taking people's homes while discussing building ourselves a new fancy home. And that is something I'm having a hard time reconciling with the fact that this building and staff it's been tight. I clearly recognize that. I've mentioned before the clerk sitting next to me, and that we as a professional organization, as we are trying to lure and attract businesses, we need to have an office for our mayor. Is clearly something that maybe rang home a little more this last week than and under the conditions. But I come back to, does the $3.5 million for this project justify us locking ourselves into building a new house, retrofitting a new building, to the tune of what might be $8 or $9 million under the financial situations that we're in now. That's the greatest concern that I have. And I recognize that I would like that building, Mr. Mayor. I think you and I were both amazed. The council chambers, what it provided staff and the public to participate in meetings was really remarkable. And I'd encourage any of you on future trips to tour other city infrastructure. But I keep coming back to where we're at now and what are our needs in relation to what we want. I see that we have some needs, but I think that we should also, in times like this, give thanks to what we have. We have a nice council chamber now. Yeah, I'd like to have staff to have bigger offices, but I just don't know if it's the right time. And so that's why I continue to kind of struggle with this. And I clearly, to Alderman Pittner's point, yeah, I'd be a foolish elected official, and I'd expect to be recalled tomorrow if I wanted to go all in on the Big M building. I think we all recognize that that's wish cycling in a whole different aspect. But I think that we are going to end up owning that building at some point. It's falling further and further in disrepair, and that's why I asked the question. Maybe we should buy it and tear it down and start there. I'm concerned about taking the property tax value off the Wells Fargo building for our own needs. So there's some legitimate concerns I think that we have to accommodate. I look forward to hearing from you, and I just want to put all those aspects out there, Mr. Mayor, so I'm just being transparent.
Alderman Pittner.
Thank you, Mayor. And I agree with Alderman Straight's comments as far as needs and wants, and the ongoings of the city and buyouts and whatnot are not lost on me. But I also have to, as an elected official, I think we all do, have to recognize that there's needs of the city as an organization and how to run efficiently and operate efficiently. Again, that's, I think, why we pushed for the last time this was on our agenda, to get more information, vet out both options, and so we could make a smart decision. I think we all would have experienced a little buyer's remorse if we would have got in there thinking that the estimates were what we thought they were. Even the engineer, the professionals thought that they were maybe a little high, and then we see what they inflate to. However, before moving forward with the Wells Fargo building, and I know this is going to be perceived as kicking a can down the road, I would like to see some cost delivered to the council on expanding on this site. I would like to vet out both options. I think both are options. Yes, I understand the federal dollars won't apply to this location, and I'm aware of that. But some of those dollars, like we've seen, an additional need for dollars for buyouts. These dollars can maybe fall back within the guidelines of an activity can be moved around for some of the activities for the grant dollars, and maybe we'd be better off spending dollars on expanding here at this location. I would just like to see that information. I'm not saying that's what I want to do, but I would like to see that information before I felt comfortable moving forward with this location.
Alderman Pittner, I'm now going to look to Mr. Zakian, as I've had some brief discussions regarding the NDR program and potentially looking at how many programs, if we are looking at ending them or attempting to ask HUD to redirect more than one program to a $0 mark over to others. And I'll let Mr. Zakian kind of expound on what his conversations from the HUD folks have indicated.
Mayor Sitman and all the aldermen, I think this is a very healthy discussion. I certainly appreciate these are very difficult decisions. I do want to bring us back to some perspective which we kind of gotten away from. I first want to point out that all the different components in the NDR competition application are why we got the money. If we start changing too much of what we originally told HUD we were going to do, and we agreed to in a grant agreement, HUD is not going to look kindly upon us. I can tell you that right now. I have had several informal discussions with them. based on the special council meeting, and they very diplomatically reminded me of that repeatedly. We do not want to be put in a situation where we're viewed as a city of securing this money under false pretenses. I have to emphasize that to you. There was a balance between, and remember, this is in 2015, and I appreciate that, and circumstances change sometimes, but not to the degree that HUD is going to be willing to accept for any radical changes in our action plan. It was the city at that time that made it clear that there were multiple needs for recovery from the disaster, some of which involved buyouts, but many of which involved other needs, including moving the city hall, building low and moderate income, new house, rental housing and single-family housing, family homeless shelter, all the different activities. It is for that reason, because there was a broad vision given to HUD through our application of multiple needs, that we got the $74.3 million. That is the only reason we got it. Now, it's not to say that if in the near future we decide to move some money around, that we will not get approval. But I will tell you that, to echo what the mayor said, I did share this with the mayor. It was made clear to me that moving more than one significant project, either deleting it or changing it, would probably not, in all likelihood, would not receive HUD approval. Because again, we would be radically changing what we had represented to HUD in the first place we would do. Now, not to go deep into the weeds, but what is behind that caution to us from HUD is that there is a very detailed cost-benefit analysis that is required. When the city got the initial approval for the $74.3 million, they needed to do a comprehensive cost-benefit analysis that was part of this action plan submission, and which HUD accepted. If, whether it's for discussion purposes, whether it is deleting City Hall, moving that money elsewhere, deleting the gathering space, moving that money elsewhere, I'm going to be required to do a new cost-benefit analysis. And that was the underlying caution, very strongly worded caution that I received in my discussions with HUD, was the reminder that, John, when you do something in terms of revising your action plan, you have to understand at the end of the day, you have to be able to present a cost-benefit analysis that will still meet the original cost-benefit analysis that came with the original approval of City Hall. So that's the more statutory description. But in the context of what we're up against, if there is a decision to change something in the action plan, we get one bite at the apple in terms of a major project move. It could be the gathering space, it could be City Hall, but it can't be more than one. The other thing I would also want to reinforce, because I know this has been discussed back and forth, and again, I understand the challenges and dilemmas you all face. And none of you were here when this promise was made. In fact, you're dealing with promises that were made by prior leadership. It was the city's promise to HUD that they were going to relocate City Hall to the downtown that got the score that gave the funding for relocating City Hall. And the argument was made that we had to move it out of harm's way, that were it not for the yeoman effort on the part of a number of people, but especially our Public Works Department, that built a temporary dike over here, that this facility would have been to some degree flooded, and it certainly would have severely damaged the Emergency Operations Center. And it was on that basis that it was approved. So there is no feasible way that I can go back to HUD and argue that we should switch this money from relocation to downtown to new construction.
Thank you, John. And I know we've put a hold on discussions for NDR or anything else, unless there is something exceptionally specific to City Hall and the NDR for Mr. Zakian. I do want to tail back to Alderman Straight's comments with some of his questions that he did pose to me as well. And taking a look at some of the different aspects, especially considering the timeline that we are working with. At some point, this pandemic will move on, and we certainly hope that that is long before our deadline of September 30th of 2022. And continuing to move forward, it is more than just moving City Hall out of harm's way as well. Central Dispatch is also part of this discussion, if not having a primary but a secondary relocation for that, both farther away from the railroad tracks but also away from the floodplain. The discussion that we've had for several years now in terms of the own downtown revitalization, and one of those primary cornerstones for a downtown revitalization and part of this project with NDR was more economic resiliency. Now we are looking at an issue with the pandemic that this makes complete sense in trying to ensure that this anchor is there as one of those economic cornerstones, as an anchor in our down for more economic resiliency. I take a look also at the Big M building, and let's compare for a moment. And Alderman Straight, absolutely, we toured the brand-new City Hall in Fargo, and I absolutely would encourage anybody to take a look at that. And it is a great facility for our largest city in North Dakota. There's a lot of forethought put into that. What also makes it an interesting aspect is there is a tremendous amount of new construction and revitalization around that building in their downtown that is based on an anchor that is right there. Now, granted, if we could convince the Kilbourne Group to take a look at the Big M and invest in the same way that they have in other areas of Fargo, we would open them with open arms. So if they're listening, I don't know which camera, they're invited. But there in and itself shows what an investment into their downtown. Talking with Fargo's deputy mayor, absolutely there was some consternation in the community. At $29.5 million, they built a very nice facility. We're not looking at spending that much money. We are looking at refurbishing a downtown building, I think, into what would be a great fit for now with the potential to expand. As we took a look at some of those recommendations, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the mini sky bridge was factored into that Wells Fargo design as well for potential expansion in the future when needed. It serves as a very great potential for our downtown, especially today with what we are talking about with the economics moving forward. And this was part of this discussion back in early 2015 when this idea was conceptualized, is what are we trying to be resilient towards? We knew of the flood. We knew of the railroad from January 18th, 2002. I don't know how many, the other issue was we were thinking drought. But here we are on something that wasn't considered, but this is a future activity that could further embolden our economic cornerstone towards being more resilient. There is no perfect answer. There is never a perfect answer. I think this is the best answer we have, considering all of the factors that are before us. I'm ready to move forward. I think it's time to take this step forward. We have two people from both buildings that have been waiting very patiently for an answer of what we're going to do. I'm ready to move forward today. Further discussion. This is not an easy position to make a move on. Alderman Patagula.
I have mixed feelings too. The thing that I'm trying to take is a historical perspective. We're looking at building something that will be used for 50 to 75 years. And, you know, that's a longer time frame than any of us will be around here for, but I think we have to think about that as a city. I think about our efforts now and ongoing in future to make workplaces more supportive for city employees. It's not fun to work out of a closet. We don't meet our security needs for keeping records safe. It was interesting that one building was described as being built like a fortress. I would feel more comfortable with all the kinds of terrorisms and natural disasters that seem to be happening more frequently if we had maybe a more robust facility. I also am not keen on the idea of throwing away $3.7 million that someone else has given us. And as I've said before, and I'll say again, I think when you make a promise, you really need to keep the promise. Mr. Zakian's warning today, I think, was more severe than I've heard before, and I think it's hit home even more strongly than before. If you make a commitment to the federal government, there are potentially very major, very bad consequences if you don't meet that commitment. And it's also a matter of honesty. I mean, that was promised 5 years ago. I don't know that anything has changed dramatically. I mean, some things have changed on the pro side, some have changed on the con side. Also, the longer we wait, the more costly it's going to be. I doubt that costs for building or remodeling are going to go down. We have two very willing owners who want to cooperate with us. You know, I just think and I guess the final comment is Alderman Straight said something about, you know, building a beautiful new building or something like that. I don't think we've done that in Minot. I think we've, you know, scrimped and saved and, you know, patched things over. I mean, every budget, every item, every agenda that comes to us, there are things where we've put off repairs, we've pulled off buildings, we've put off training, we've put off this, and eventually it comes back to haunt you. I don't see this as any kind of a palace. I think it's a serviceable building. I haven't been to the one in Fargo. I think I've seen it from the outside. It is pretty remarkable. I don't think we need that. I don't think we want that. I don't think anybody's proposing that. But I think there's a difference between making do as we have for decades and, you know, having something that finally meets our needs. So for all those reasons, I guess I'm more favorably inclined toward a new facility. It's very clear to me that if we do go, excuse me, a remodeled facility. If we do go toward a more remodeled facility, obviously it can't be the Midwest Federal Building. And I say that from the perspective of someone who really has still kind of a love affair with that building. It's just not reasonable. So I'm inclining more toward the former Wells Fargo building, and I think it's a reasonable kind of decision to make. Obviously, there are downsides to it. These are uncertain times, but again, I'm looking at it from the perspective of 50 to 75 years, and I think that's a very, very good compromise for that kind of time frame.
Further discussion? Alderman Wolski.
Mayor Sitma, thank you. Speak to a couple of points here. I appreciate the desire to foster economic resilience in the downtown corridor. There are a few things that I'm more supportive of in terms of a need for Minot in many, many ways. I think there's a huge part of our future that I believe is in that corridor. I'm skeptical of labeling this project as a significant mover in terms of pushing the needle in a more positive direction. The reality is we're moving this building approximately 4 blocks. And if we aren't having an impact on the downtown corridor right now, I do not see some extraordinary new impact that's going to exist as a result of the short change in location. And I think it's also important when we talk about things like economic analysis, we do so with sort of a concrete foundation or some type of feasibility study or something that allows us to really quantify and hold up and say, yes, this is what we are going to get if we make this choice. And right now, I don't see it. I think actually in terms of my intake of the larger Main Street initiative that has been sort of moving through the state over the last couple of years, I see the Wells Fargo building right now as contrary to the values that I think are being advocated for through that program. If we were to contemplate taking essentially a half of a city block on Main Street, what is very likely some of our most valuable real estate in Minot, and A, put it in city hands, and B, put half of it in parking, I don't think those are values that are Main Street friendly. I think those are values that are frankly the opposite of Main Street friendly. Yes, we're going to have some citizens a little closer, but anyway, I only bring it up because I think it's always remarkable to the degree that we can all see these issues and come away with radically different positions on how we make our decisions. With regards to the $3.75 million, it is an extraordinary opportunity, but if it convinces us to spend $8 million of our own dollars foolishly, then it wasn't a gift, it was a curse. And that's where I think we're at right now with this particular project and these NDR dollars. And it's not just on City Hall, it's on any number of different circumstances. And I realize the challenges I create for Mr. Zakian when I say that, in terms of the city wanting to honor the agreement that it made with our federal partner. But the reality is our circumstances haven't just changed a little bit since 2015. They've changed dramatically. And we are literally on the precipice of a unknown stage, of an unknown magnitude, of unknown duration. And I think it would be irresponsible for us to advance this project today under these circumstances. Mr. Meyer shared with us the rough cost of new construction on this site. If we were to develop what might be as much as a 15,000 square foot improvement, we are looking at a total cost of $4.5 million. We could fund that entirely by ourselves without the federal assistance and save the taxpayers of Minot in the neighborhood of $3.5 million. Is it going to be perfect? Is it going to be no, it won't be. But would it allow us to address our issues? That's the type of choice that I think we have to contemplate further, because millions of dollars, no matter where they come from, we have to contemplate them very carefully. And this is, I just do not believe this community, our citizens, given everything that's going on right now, are ready to advance this project. So there's no way I can support this, and I'm going to offer actually a superseding motion to table this issue for 90 days.
We have a motion to table. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion to table and a second. There is no discussion on the motion to table. Kelly, please call the roll.
Wolski?
Yes.
Sitma?
No.
Janser?
No.
Olson?
No.
Pittner?
No.
Padragula?
No.
Straight.
Yes.
Motion fails. We're back to the original motion. Alderman Pittner.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate Alderman Wolski's comments. I agree that pretty much everything he said. I do see the value of moving this even 4 blocks. I think anybody in the dead of winter or in a morning like we had wouldn't be that excited to cross Broadway and the kind of weather that we see around here. But I do agree that I think, you know, if we have federal dollars in the neighborhood of almost $4 million, but then we have to kick in the additional 8, when we could maybe spend 4 on this location, or 5 or 6, anything that would be a net gain, I think has to be looked at. I didn't support the motion to table because I don't know if we need 90 days. I think we could do I think we could maybe, again, we're going to be looking at these NDR. I think we're going to have another special meeting coming up here relatively soon. I think we could maybe collaborate those 2 meetings. I don't know if anyone would entertain that idea. My thoughts.
Further discussion? Further discussion? If not, we have a motion. Alderman Straight.
Mr. Mayor, I would move to table for 30 days.
Second.
We have a motion to table for 30 days by Alderman Straight, a second by Alderman Pittner. Again, not a discussionable item. Kelly, please call the roll.
Straight?
Yes.
Wolski?
Yes.
Sitma?
No.
Janser?
No.
Olson?
No.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padragula?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Motion carried. That takes us to personal appearances on our agenda. This is an opportunity for anyone to come forward and speak on any item that is or not on our agenda this evening. Again, an opportunity for anyone to come forward to speak on any item that is or is not on our agenda this evening. Seeing none, we will move on to the department reports. Our library director is with us this evening. Good evening. I appreciate you being here, despite the fact that the library is now vacant for a week. However, it is an opportunity to get some things done. Good evening, Janet.
Closed but not vacant.
Yes.
Yes, thank you, Mayor and City Council. It's been an interesting and long day for all of us, I'm sure. My main reason for being here is actually to present you with the annual report of the Minot Public Library, which I will do, and also talk about some of our goals for 2020. So we'll see if I can get this to work better than anyone else. Maybe not. What?
Man in the corner.
Did you sanitize this properly? Okay.
Just so we're clear, we're still not under the 10-person threshold.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Now to make sure it's turned on. So complicated. All right, thank you all for your patience. I just wanted to start with a little bit of history, which is interesting as you're talking about City Hall. The Minot Public Library actually started in 1907 when 5 people came together with the idea that they'd like to create a library. Opened in 1908 by renting 2 rooms for $25 a month, and then in 1911 received one of the Carnegie grants to open a library in what is now the Carnegie Building. The building across the street here was built in 1966. Same building we have been in for 54 years. However, in 1987, we received some donations to expand, and then again in 2001, we expanded to add on a whole nother addition, which is the middle section, the middle photo that you see there. So just a little comparison, when the library first opened in 1908, we had 1,234 registered library card holders. At the end of 2019, we had 26,204. Only 1,600 books at the time in 1908, and now we have 136,000 items, and that does not include just books, as I hope most of you know. So we have grown a little bit, as you can see, as would be expected in 110 years. But for 2019, I want to share some of the numbers with you. So again, since I have been library director for going on 5 years now, we have continued to see an increase in the circulation of our physical items, and we continue to add to our collection. In 2019, we added a board game collection, which is pictured below. So now we have board games that can be checked out, along with tools and robotics and video games and laptops and Blu-ray players. And I'll stop because I could keep going. As far as people, the number of people who have library cards continue to increase also. We had a 4% increase in 2018, and we also had more than 5,000 people more than the year prior who came into the library. That also translated due to program attendance. So we had an 8% increase in program attendance, which includes everything from puppet shows to dogs in the library to snakes in the library, which you can see on the screen. Some highlights from 2019, which may not be so exciting to you guys, but were pretty exciting to me, is we finally finished our carpeting project, which is there on the left. Really great project. I think it looks great. Completion of our digital sign outside, which was longer than we thought it would take, but it is out there and does a very good job. Our library board, our 2017 to 2018 library board, which included Alderman Lisa Olson, received the Library Champion of the Year award from the North Dakota Library Association for all that they did to support the Minot Public Library. The biggest thing, however, the most impactful thing for me was that in 2019, in July of 2019, we eliminated fines for children 18 and under. This was a very difficult decision. This was not something that we did lightly, but I'd like to tell you why and when we started. So approximately 2.5 years ago, our children's librarian was at a back-to-school event at the auditorium when a child walked by and wanted to stop over at the table where we had crafts and things, and the parent said to the child, "No, we can't go there, we have fines." And it just put us on a mission to make that stop. So the mission of the Minot Public Library is to connect, enrich, and inspire. So why should we be in the business of punishing and restricting children who cannot drive themselves to the library to return items? How can we enrich people when we are putting up barriers? This was not a move about reducing or eliminating accountability. It was about eliminating barriers. And finally, we want to inspire people. So how can we inspire people to use the library if we are restricting them? So I'm sure some people are interested in how that impacted us. After 9 months, I can say it's still kind of too early to tell. We have not seen any extreme negative reactions from this elimination of fines. On the other hand, we've seen a 63% increase in children's library cards. We've had almost 3,000 more children's items checked out, and more people who came to the library between July and December of last year compared to that same time in 2018. As far as revenue, for 2019, our revenue for fine collection was only $43.08 less than what we had anticipated. Also, the number of items overdue seems to be about standard. I mean, it's something we are monitoring on a constant basis, but it is a move that we are really proud of and that we have heard nothing but great things from our library patrons. So along those lines, for 2020, our major goals, which have been submitted to the City Council, are for the library to update the strategic plan. Included in that, we are looking to compile and collect community feedback on library services. We are working with our Library Board Building and Grounds Committee to oversee an exterior project, which was approved on second reading tonight. Thank you, and which we will be working with JLG on. We're very excited to be able to invest in our building, which is 54 years old. We're also going to be working, as usual, to continue to make residents and organizations of our area aware of what we do. And we're going to work to prepare for future transitions. How will we know if we were successful? Well, we have laid out these as our key performance indicators. We're going to be measuring and tracking customer service, collection management, which is the items we have and how they circulate and how they're used, staffing, budget, community outreach, building maintenance and improvements, user experience, and strategic planning. Some challenges we have for 2020 and beyond. Staffing, as I said, that is one of our goals this year. In May, our children's librarian is going to be retiring after more than 40 years with the Minot Public Library. Wow. The party will be May 3rd. Please come. While this position has been filled, it's identified that we don't necessarily have internal candidates to fill other positions. So that is going to continue to be a focus for us. Exterior renovation, as I mentioned, the precast, that is the columns up and down the building and around, are showing some great deterioration, and those are photos there. So we want to protect the city's investment, and we will be working on doing that this year. Recycling. Recycling has been a major issue for us, which has been surprising, but I will say in January, we took about 7,000 pounds of recycling to Calix before they closed, and now we have nowhere for most of that to go. So it is interesting that I am leading off a recycling conversation, but this is something that not everyone thinks of when they think of the library. We're getting rid of approximately 400 magazines and newspapers every month, as we keep 3 months worth of these. Where are they going to go? What happens when a book is damaged, when it comes to us with water damage or tears? This kind of stuff, including just cardboard, right now is going into garbage. Our garbage has increased threefold since the closing of Calix, and we are not sure where we're going to go with that. But finally, the biggest challenge that we face, and we always face, is public perception. So I've had people in the community, leaders in the community, elected officials in the community say, why are libraries still important? I can get everything I want on Google. So I thought, I'm going to ask the people. So I kind of put a little plea out there on Facebook and Instagram on Friday. And within 6 hours, just 6 hours, we had about 40 people comment and tell us why the library is important to them. So this is just a snippet of that. Probably my favorite one is that it opens the world to me. It's still something we have to fight constantly. Another way for us to promote the value of the library is by showing it in numbers, and that's what this is. So in 2019, we spent approximately $1.7 million. The value of services we provided in 2019 was almost $9 million. I know I've said this before, we have a whole way of tracking this. There's a spreadsheet. I'm happy to show it to you if you want. But basically what that is if we provide a service to the public and that same service were purchased, what would that cost? So on average, if it costs $17 for an individual to buy a new book, we checked out 144,000 books. So that value translates into almost $2.5 million. That's money people don't have to spend. Another way to put that is, based on estimates of population, we provided about $188 of service for each individual residing in the city of Minot in 2019. That number has steadily increased since we started tracking it this way, which has really only been 3 or 4 years. But that is excellent news that we went from $147 per individual to $188. On the right are some lists of what those services are. It's everything from the books and CDs that we check out to study rooms and meeting rooms and subscription services. Another way to put that is for each dollar we spent, we provided $5.40 in value or services. So I wanted to just put this in a little bit of a different perspective. During the planning process, you're all very familiar with this graph. Excuse me. But what I wanted to figure out is how much of that 34% of the city of Minot is the library, and that's it. That bit in red, which I estimate is about 5%, but I'm not a mathematician, but that's how much money goes toward the library, going back almost $9 million in services we provide. So that's the boring numbers stuff. Let's talk about what's next. We have no signs of slowing down, even though today threw us for a little bit of a loop. So what are we going to keep doing? We're just going to keep trying to fulfill our mission, which is to connect, enrich, and inspire. We'll continue lending out our items, offering online resources, connecting people to resources and information, hosting programs, providing research, and one of my most particularly proud moments is the number of people we collaborate with. This list here is not all-encompassing and is pretty much just 2019, the number of organizations that we work with, because we want to be seen as a collaborator within the community. So, a few areas that we're especially taking some interest in 2020 is going to be the census. Already, the library staff are ready. They are willing to help people take the census at the library. Once we are open again, we will take questions over the phone. We will make sure that gets done. We're also going to be a key center for informing people about the election, where to vote, what positions are open, everything that we can to get the correct and accurate information out. And in the last week, we've been working very hard to distribute accurate information on topics that impact the Minot area, including COVID-19 or the coronavirus. We're constantly updating our website with links to sources such as WHO, CDC, First District Health Unit, all of that information. But as I've said, we were kind of thrown for a loop last night around 8 o'clock when we decided we had to close our doors. But that doesn't mean we aren't there and we aren't working. Within 12 hours, and most of that is overnight hours, our staff had prepared for a drive-up service where you can call the library, reserve online, or what's the other option? Or message us on Facebook, and we will bring books to your car. Not just books. Why don't you check out some board games while you're home with the kids? Or maybe a binge box, which is a set of 8 to 10 DVDs, a TV series. There is so much that you can do, and we don't want to stop people just because we can't open our doors this week. There's also a huge variety of online resources. You can download children's books, adult books, magazines, comics, audiobooks, streaming movies. I'll stop, I promise. Also take lessons. You can learn Swahili through Mango Languages. You can take a class on dog grooming or Excel or PowerPoint through Universal Class. Through Creative Bug, you can learn to knit, or who knows what else creative people do. Starting tomorrow, we're going to have crafting sets available for people to pick up as well, because our children's librarians never stop, and they have crafts that they were so excited to use this week for St. Patrick's Day and other things, that since you can't come and do them at the library, call us and we'll bring them out to your car tomorrow. We're not going to let some problem with not opening the doors stop us from providing the services to the library. So again, we understand that this is a safety issue, this is a public health issue, and we are a very public-facing building. We closed our doors because we felt that it was in the best safety of our patrons and our staff. It was a difficult decision, but we're gonna find a way to make it work for everyone, and we'll see what happens. We'll take it one day at a time.
Thank you so much, Janet. Any questions for our library director, Alderman Wolski?
Janet, thank you for the presentation, for the good work you do on an ongoing basis. It's a challenging decision that everybody had to make in the last day or so to choose to close the doors, and I applaud that. I think given the nature of the way people come and go in the library and using computers and things like that, this was the responsible choice for public health. And I also want to thank you for so quickly getting the car service up and running. I think I may have been one of the first people in town to take advantage of that, and I am very much looking forward to if we do end up in a situation where we have to spend a lot of time at home, then I'm going to make the most of it. And I think the library is a great tool for helping all of us do that.
Further questions or discussion, Alderman Patagula?
Just a compliment on the report and the inventiveness and resilience of your staff. Really remarkable, particularly with the curbside services. Walking to this City Hall building today, I ran into two families who were leaving the library. The service wasn't up yet, and they were very disappointed, especially their kids. So I tried to give them some information, suggested they call you, and it really is a resource that until we stop having, perhaps we don't appreciate enough. So I really want to compliment you and your staff on your very hard and creative work.
Alderman Straight.
Mr. Mayor, I would say, Janet, if you have needs, I've recognized in the last, I think I've said it numerous times over the last 6 months, I'm incredibly amazed at the continued support this community gives in fundraising campaigns. So if there are things you need in the interim while the doors are closed, if you need supplies, if you need, put the all call out, because my household loves the library, and so if there's anything you need, ask, because we have this captive audience that's at home. I'm looking across at Mr. Pittner and his young children, and people want to help now. It's a good time. So,
further discussion or questions? Thank you, Janet.
Thank you.
That takes us to our liaison reports, number 8. Seeing that this might be a tad bit light, but we'll start over with Alderman Pittner.
I was fortunate enough, Mayor, to have one of the committees I sit on, the library committee, library board, to have Janet present to you, so I will leave the rest to you guys.
Alderman Janser.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We had a meeting of the City, County, Park, School Liaison Committee, and myself and I think Alderman Straight and Alderman Olson were present at that meeting. There were kind of three main topics that were discussed: preparation for the election, preparation for the census, and then some discussion about the draft budget for the central dispatch for next year. And so we had not met, this group had not met for a number of months, but we are attempting to try to have regular meetings, sort of quarterly, and schedules being put together for that, and we should get on a more regular meeting schedule going forward here. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Janser. Any questions? If not, we'll move to Alderman Wolski.
Mayor Sitma, thanks. I'm going to touch on two committees. One, Planning and Zoning Steering Committee is been working diligently every 2 weeks. We are approaching the end of our work. We've most recently had several weeks, probably 2 or 3 weeks of discussion on parking and the amount of parking we require in new buildings, new developments, et cetera. And it's been, I think, a very fruitful discussion. I think we've ended up with a model that provides, more flexibility for developers and property people building property and improving property, and also a model that I think will very likely force less productive real estate into asphalt. And I think there's some very sound foundational economics in moving that direction. And so I'm excited about the changes in that regard that are coming. We have our sign ordinance that we're taking up Wednesday. I believe, Mr. Billingsley, I'm getting a nod. So that also has been in front of us, I think, on a number of occasions over the last couple of years. There have been a few variances. There's been other issues associated with signage. So we're going back to improve on what we have right now, which I think is a decent foundation, but certainly always able to improve. I also want to talk a little bit about the Renaissance Zone Board. Our meeting in February was a tour of the city with members of the board. So Mr. Hrinka has stepped out, but he provided us with a bus. We went through some of the neighborhoods, kind of took a look at where it might make sense for that program to extend or move to or focus on next. You all may recall it's been probably several months at least, but the number of blocks we can put in that program is based on our population due to some flood protection buyouts and some resiliency areas. We had removed a number of blocks, and so we have blocks that are available to us. And so that's I think a development decision that we are contemplating, and it's probably going to be here before the council before too long. So.
Thank you, Alderman Wolski. Any questions for Josh? If not, thanks, sir. I will just report that the one other committee that I would typically be on was supposed to meet yesterday with MADC, and because of circumstances, I did miss that one and was otherwise involved in, I'm sorry, last Thursday. I've already lost track of my days. I did miss that one because of other circumstances. Alderman Straight.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I missed Cirrus Basin planning last week because we went to Fargo, and I want to thank you for that. I thought it was really well organized. We had a great crew. I certainly want to give a shout out to Minot Air Force Base staff that participated, as well as the crew from Farmers Union, and thanks to the Farmers Union for the bus. So thank you to that, Mr. Mayor. Second, I just wanted to point out there's something happening, and I'm sure I'm going to get an update this month at Visit Minot. I think as we've all been through the IEDC process and we've tried to talk about efficiencies and streamline, and we all go to a tremendous amount of meetings, I think Visit Minot is looking at an idea of how they can engage ex officios and other members of the community for better collaboration in a non-meeting setting. So I'm kind of excited to hear what's going to happen on that front. I think all too often people can't attend and meet, and the people that need to meet and talk and share ideas, we could do it at a better level where
we could get up and move and talk about what's happening in a better fashion. So I'm excited to see where that's going to go, and maybe I'll try to provide an update next month, Mr. Mayor. So thank you, sir.
Alderman Olson.
Well, Mr. Mayor, this has been mentioned a few times tonight, but as you did mention, the Census kiosks have been temporarily shut down. We had kiosks in 3 different locations that were going to be in place for community members who didn't have access to a computer or to an iPad. There was also going to be permanent census kiosks set up at the library, but of course, as Janet mentioned, they are temporarily closed. My encouragement to everyone who does have a computer or a tablet or a smartphone and has some time at home, they should go to 2020census.gov and do the census at home, because we don't want to miss this, even though we are in the kind of throes of a pandemic right now. We certainly want to know who lives in our community. We want to get accurate numbers, so take 10 minutes, get your family counted, and if people are unable to do that at home, hopefully within the next few weeks, we're able to get those kiosks up and running again.
And thank you, Alderman Olson. And they're starting to show up in the mail. I got mine, even though I already filled out mine electronically last week. And it's a very simple process, and I had a few people that haven't done much online, and they were able to get through it on a kiosk. So hopefully we can get through this, get the kiosk back up. But appreciate all your work, Brian. Appreciate all your work and all the volunteers, and we'll keep it moving.
And I should add that even if they don't get the information in the mail, they can still go to 2020census.gov, and with their address, they're able to still complete the census.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lisa. Alderman Patagula.
Nothing to report.
Thank you, sir. That is the finalization of the liaison reports. We are back to the miscellaneous items, and an issue that has back before us one more time, years in the making. We have our Assistant Public Works Director, Jason, who is back with the results of the survey.
Good evening, members of council. It's a fairly short presentation, so plenty of time for discussion and questions afterwards. So my recollection of the motion that was made back probably pushing a couple months ago was to proceed with the single stream recycling program pending results of the survey. So we immediately kicked off, got Odney on board to help us put this survey together and then conduct it. And it actually got done much quicker than we expected. I wasn't expecting to be in front of you until sometime in April, but the survey went very rapidly, and so I'll get to the meat of it. So primary objectives were measuring support for the City of Minot starting a single stream curbside recycling program with some statistical validity, and then identify customer concerns or reasons for not supporting it, and then evaluating possible price points were a program to be started. So like I said, the commission was approved by the City of Minot and then conducted by Odney. The margin of error for this survey turned out to be 4.82% at a 95% confidence interval. So coverage area demographics, we had a total of 400 total participants. They were all Minot sanitation customers, 18 years or older. There was a combination of landlines and cell phones. The demographics ended up being 54.5% female, 45.5% male. And then 28% of the folks were under 35, 28.5% were between 35 and 54, and 38% 55 or older. The survey really was very short. It basically just got to the crux of the issue. We wanted to determine if people were sanitation customers, and if you were, in general, would you support a recycling program? That's this question right here. So in general, without asking them a price point or anything like that, 65.25% said yes, 28.5% no, and then 6.25%, didn't know or refused to answer. So then when you get into, if we're looking to offer a program at a monthly cost, how does that affect participation or support? So at a $2 to $3 cost, we still had 55.5% support. At $3 to $5, 37.5%. And at $5 to $6, still had 24%. So based on our current number of customers is right in the neighborhood of 12,700. That gives you about 7,050 households that would participate at $2 to $3. 4,763 that would participate at $3 to $5, and 3,048 that would participate at $5 to $6. So the 4.82% comes out to about plus or minus 612 households. And with that, I would stand for questions. Like I said, I was going to try to keep it short. I gave each of you that's a executive summary. They analyze the data just a little bit further than what I just presented, mostly just the raw data. But there are some additional analysis in there that you might want to take a look at.
Thank you, Jason. I appreciate the breakdown and the information, certainly on the work to this point. Just for a quick reference on the last presentation as far as our cost point, as the market was 7 days ago, before 7 days ago when things substantially changed, was it about $4? Was that where our price point was, if I'm trying to recall?
Mayor Sitma, the proposal I gave a couple months ago, I was at about $2 to $2.50.
$2 to $2.50, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Questions for our Assistant Public Works Director? Alderman Patagula.
Could you make available the more in-depth analysis for us somewhere, or send me one?
Are you talking like the data tables? Yes, I can.
Thank you.
Alderman Janser.
Jason, do we have any idea what the changes might be, or what the effects might be of the coronavirus thing that we're in on any of this? I mean, that's probably a hard question, but.
Mayor Sitma, Alderman Janser, it's a tough question to answer. At this point, I don't think we have to worry about any relationship with China. China has basically kind of upended the entire recycling market, so all the materials that we would be dealing with locally are going to be kept, in this region, probably the Minneapolis area.
Alderman Wolski.
Maybe just to speak to I think factors that we might on council be considering. Coronavirus certainly present on every decision right now, but I think the price of fuel and the price of gas might be the much larger factor in potentially two ways. One, it's going to reduce costs to hauling, which is a part of this plan, back and forth to Minneapolis. So that's a lowering of our price cost, which would be valuable, but it's also going to lower the cost of new plastic, which also probably then by next steps in the process might make recyclable plastic worth less as well. So there's, I think maybe the biggest mover that we've watched in the last few months that might have a factor on this is the price of oil. So,
further questions or discussion? Alderman Olson.
What's our next step?
Mr. Sorensen.
So with the direction I've been given, I currently have some money allocated. So if there's a comfort level to move forward, we could get a consultant on board and start looking for a location and start designing a transfer facility and flesh out some of those costs and look into that location. And then I could bring that information, that'll take us a few months to get a consultant, design a facility, and then we would have to then allocate the additional funding to basically complete that facility. That's something that that I could start work on relatively soon if the direction was still there.
Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If I may offer a piece of advice on this, because there's been so much information that's gone around on this, and it's been incredible, what I would propose is that you allow the staff to develop a proposal, a recycling program proposal for your evaluation. And in that, we would evaluate the cost, what the program would look like, if there's a buy-in or opt-out, or any number of those types of things. I mean, I think we're very close to that, but before we go and design facilities and we start putting money into those designs and that sort of thing, I think you should have a look at what exactly that program might look like. And as I recall, we needed 4,000 households or customers to make the numbers work. We have exceeded that in both or the non-cost and the, I've lost the numbers here, let me go. So up to at least $3 is what I was trying to get at. Thank you for the graphic. And so I think if we put together a recycling program proposal for you, and then you can tell us how you want that to look. I mean, depending upon if you say how many people you want to opt out, if it's one time, if it's forever, or that may adjust the size of the facility. It might adjust the number of people to run the facility, the operation itself. That would be my proposal to you. And I appreciate Jason being willing to jump right in. And that's definitely work that needs to be done if we move forward. But I just think maybe a proposal, for the whole thing would be something you'd want to look at first.
Alderman Straight.
Mr. Mayor, I appreciate the city manager's recommendation. And I guess also something that I've been thinking about is, just to put it, how do we incentivize or talk with the haulers that are currently utilizing our landfill, dumping, tipping fees? Clearly, we know it's a matter of math and how we're going to maybe work with them as well to ensure that we are going to have full capacity running to the cities, if that's what ultimately is going to end up, or is this going to go to Fargo? So there are additional things I would like to hear from staff as well as it pertains to the issue, sir.
Further discussion, Mr. City Manager.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Alderman Straight, that's exactly what putting those kinds of things into the proposal would look like. If you wanted to have a incentive-based tipping fee, for example, for folks outside of our community that want to start a recycling program themselves to create some synergy, for example, that will be something we could build in the program and do a pro forma off of. I don't know what people will want to do about that, but that'll give you an opportunity to say, yes, we either want a penalty-based program for people who don't recycle or an incentive-based program for people who do. How does it impact our overall numbers, so on and so forth? So I think the program components would allow you that discussion as a city council and essentially be able to make a better informed decision as to what the overall infrastructure might be needed to move forward.
Thank you.
Further discussion. In terms of time, I think that this does give us a little bit of time as well. I would not personally be ready to move forward on this tonight if it was an up or down vote, given the circumstances that just halted another proposal for moving forward. Hopefully that some things get straightened out down very quickly on a much broader scale. So this does buy us a little time while getting some work done on what we can show as a deliverable to the public. So absolutely, and I don't believe we need a motion on that. We can just turn you loose, and if you do have questions or need other direction, you could certainly bring that back to the question of the full council. Mr. Sorensen.
Will do. So, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate your work. Before we hit adjournment, I do want to tail back to one specific issue. I know that there has been some pushback from some folks in the community regarding COVID-19 as far as being overreactive. When the Center for Disease Control, when the North Dakota Department of Health and other folks are making recommendations, we would be remiss not to pay attention. I would make the recommendation to the community. We do have the availability to watch online. If you we encourage it, of course, at all times to tune in, to log on, to keep track of what is going on in social media as far as the interaction that way. In this period of social distancing, I am encouraging people to watch online rather than come and sit in the chairs. That being said, if you do want to come and interact at the dais, as we saw tonight, that is free and welcome as well. The Attorney General has said as much. So that came down from an email this morning from the Attorney General of North Dakota that right now the public meetings rules and regulations are still as they were. But I think just in the precautionary eventualities that we're moving forward, it would be a good idea for folks to watch online instead of coming in and sitting along with a lot of other people as we're yet still well above that 10-person mark. This is going to continue to evolve. We as the city, again, are in that tertiary role, but we will continue to push information from what is going on with city services, with the help of city manager and all of our department heads and city staff. So we will continue to make the public aware of what is going on within the city, as well as helping push that information out through our social media from the North Dakota Department of Health, First District Health Unit, and other messages from the CDC as they come forward. So if there's any questions from council or anything, this is a great opportunity to have hopefully not a very lengthy discussion as we're getting up there, but we'll take the time. Alderman Patagula.
An unrelated matter.
We are in the area for other discussion as well, unless there's other discussion on this subject immediate. Please.
Just to follow up on the 30 days we bought ourselves with the City Hall discussion, I know staff have submitted in the past information about an alternative just south of us here, and I think we've gotten bits and pieces of that over the months and maybe a year. If we could get a summary of, not a summary, if we could get all that pulled together and delivered to us so we can use these 30 days productively, because that seems to be the other major option at this point, and I'm really at a loss which particular month or meeting that was in, but if the staff could gather that all together and send it to us for productive use of the time. Thank you.
And Alderman Patagula, that would put us on the April 20th City Council meeting for that 30-day time frame, if my memory serves correct here. If we have no other discussion before us, I would look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion by Alderman Pittner. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderman Olson. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. We're adjourned.
Hey Minot, 2020 is the year for more. Yes, it's the U.S. Census season, and with it, Minot could see more. More opportunities for business, more federal funding for roads, for our schools, and for our community. Take part in something more. Take the census, because for us, more means more. Visit minotnd.org to learn more.